Tonight, we drift into the story of silence. The kind of silence that came long before music, long before whispers, even before the first breath of wind moved across the land. Not the silence of a sleeping forest or a quiet room at night, but a silence so complete, it didn't even know it was silent. The kind of silence that existed before Earth became alive. Have you ever wondered what the world was like before life, before grass, before oceans, before even the idea of a beginning? Imagine standing on a vast plain, not of grass or sand, but of cooling rock, black and cracked, still glowing faintly from heat. Above you, no stars yet visible, just smoke, dust, and a sun trying to burn through a thick, toxic sky. The air isn't safe, the ground is unkind, but still, you're here, witnessing the opening chapter of a story that would one day include all of us. Billions of years ago, Earth was just a hot, molten ball, a newborn planet, loud with fire but empty of meaning. It spun quickly, irregularly, constantly pounded by leftover debris from the birth of the solar system. It was violent, it was chaotic, but perhaps, like all beginnings, it had its own kind of quiet. Earth had no oceans then, no lakes, no gentle rains, just steam, and magma, and change, and slowly, in ways invisible to time itself, that change began to take shape. The ashen cradle. Have you ever boiled water on a stove and watched as it calmed down over time? The bubbles slow, the steam softens, and the surface returns to stillness. That's what happened to Earth, just over a few 100 million years. Its molten skin began to harden, its boiling clouds began to cool, and out of those clouds came rain, not a drizzle, not a passing shower, but rain that fell for centuries, maybe longer. Imagine standing on a newly formed cliff, watching water cascade from a sky that never clears. The world isn't dry anymore, it's filling, like a cup catching memory. It's strange to think of water as a character in Earth's story, but without it, nothing else would follow. Water is the gentle sculptor of life, not loud or proud, but absolutely essential. It carves, it carries, it connects, and on this young Earth, it began pooling into great oceans, saltless, lifeless, but filled with potential. The recipe of life. You might be surprised to learn that life doesn't begin with something living. It begins with a dance of molecules, with carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and just the right amount of curiosity. Picture Earth's oceans then, not blue and familiar, but dark, heated from below by volcanic vents, and stirred by the raw energy of a spinning planet. Here in these warm chemical-rich waters, something extraordinary began to unfold. Molecules bumped into each other, again and again. Some bonded, some broke, most meant nothing, but every once in a while, one stayed, one remembered. And in this slow, silent chemistry, something began to happen that would echo across time. A molecule formed that could copy itself. It sounds small, doesn't it? Just a chemical reaction, just a strand of atoms copying their arrangement. But that simple act of replication was the spark. It was the first flicker of memory, the first whisper of identity, the first I am, not conscious, not aware, but persistent, not a bang but a murmur. When people ask, how did life begin, they sometimes hope for a dramatic moment, a lightning strike, a cosmic message, a sudden miracle. But life began quietly, not in a flash but in repetition, not with a voice but with rhythm, replication, mutation, repetition, again, over and over, until the molecules that copied best became more common, and those that broke apart simply faded away. It's a strange thought, isn't it, that the earliest ancestors of every creature that would ever live, fish, birds, wolves, people, were once just tiny strands of material, floating in a warm, forgotten sea, not knowing they were beginning something enormous. A sea without names. Let your mind wander now, to that early Earth. The oceans stretch endlessly, but there is no coral, no whales, no color, just currents, just chemistry, just silence. But below the surface, invisible to any eye, life has already begun. Single-celled organisms, so small they could float through the thread of a needle, are now thriving, feeding, splitting, dying, beginning again. There's no light down there, no sound, no stories, but it's happening, and it's everywhere. The breath that changed everything. Have you ever walked through a forest and felt the oxygen filling your lungs? Have you ever taken a deep breath and forgotten, just for a moment, that this air was made for you? You might not know this, but oxygen wasn't always here, not like it is today. In fact, the arrival of oxygen was almost the end of everything. It was early microbes, ancient, invisible pioneers that learned to harness sunlight. They didn't have eyes, but they could feel light, and they used it to turn carbon into energy. In the process, they released oxygen. At first, it was absorbed by the oceans, the rocks, the iron, but eventually, it escaped. It changed the air, it filled the sky, and suddenly, a world that had never known breath was full of it. But here's the twist. Most life at the time couldn't survive in oxygen. What gave birth to our world nearly wiped it clean again. Fragility and fortune. Life on Earth has always walked a thin line. Too hot and the oceans would boil. Too cold and everything would freeze. Too much pressure, too little carbon. The wrong kind of star. And none of this happens. You, me, rain, rivers, thoughts, songs, gone before they ever had a chance to form. But somehow, the balance held. The atmosphere found its rhythm. The ocean protected what was delicate. And Earth, this lonely, spinning marble in the void, became the first planet we know of that told itself a story. The mirror pool. Let me leave you with an image. Imagine a small pool of water on a quiet rocky shore somewhere on the early Earth. Steam curls from its surface. Bubbles rise from the warmth below. Above it, the clouds swirl. The wind is still. No creatures watch. No sky remembers. And yet in that pool, a molecule copies itself. Not because it knows, but because it can. And that is enough. That one small action will echo forward into forests, into lungs, into eyes that watch stars, into you. So the next time you wonder what it means to be alive, maybe remember the silence, and the warmth, and the ocean that waited. Earth didn't just get life, it became life. And it all began with a molecule that wouldn't let go. You've heard the silence. Now feel the heat. Imagine peeling back the layers of the earth, deeper and deeper, until the rock is no longer solid, until it folds and flows like a slow river of fire. This is the world as it once was, a planet so young it hadn't yet learned how to hold still. No mountains, no oceans, no soil beneath your feet. Only magma, only storms, only the birth pains of something waiting to settle. This chapter of Earth's story is known as the Hadean Aeon. It's named after Hades, not by coincidence, because in this time, Earth was more underworld than world, not a cradle for life, but a furnace, not a planet we'd recognize, but one we can still feel beneath our feet. If you could stand on that surface and somehow survive, you wouldn't hear birds, you'd hear thunder, you'd hear stone cracking open, you'd hear impact after impact as the sky itself rained rock and metal down onto the barely cooled crust. This was the late heavy bombardment, a time when comets, asteroids, and planet-sized fragments slammed into Earth again and again, leaving scars, carving basins, vaporizing oceans that were just beginning to form. But violence is not the opposite of creation. Sometimes it's part of the process. And in this chaos, Earth was beginning to arrange itself, to sculpt the layers we walk on now. The shape of a planet. Let your thoughts drift beneath the surface now, below the crust, below the continents that don't yet exist. Deeper, you'll find the mantle, a vast, slow-churning sea of rock, too solid to be liquid, too hot to be still. It rises and falls like breath, reshaping continents from below, even before there were any names to give them. And deeper still, the core, a ball of iron and nickel, spinning like a secret at the center of it all. Even now that core is moving. Even now it powers the magnetic field that shields us from solar wind. Even now, it hums with memory. But back then in the Hadean, none of this was stable. The crust cracked open regularly. The oceans, if they existed, boiled away in moments. And every time things began to cool, something from space would come crashing in, resetting the clock. It's almost poetic. that Earth had to be destroyed over and over again before it could become the kind of world that nurtures life. Sometimes we think of life as delicate, but maybe what it really needed was persistence, not peace, just time. A world without blue. We often picture early Earth as dark, but darkness is not the right word. It was bright, terrifyingly so. Lava glowed on the surface. Lightning split the sky constantly. Volcanoes painted the air with ash and metal vapor, and yet, there was no blue sky, no sunrises, no color as we know it. The atmosphere was thick, not with clouds but with gases, methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide and water vapor, and above it space looked back indifferently. Stars burned quietly in the void. The moon, still glowing from its recent birth, loomed large in the sky, much closer than it is now. But nothing living looked up, because nothing living was there. And still, something waited, not with awareness, but with potential. The chemistry of heat. Heat is often seen as a destroyer, but it is also a great transformer. In Earth's early atmosphere, the energy from constant lightning, solar radiation, and volcanic heat wasn't just noise, it was a spark, a stimulus, a constant whisper that said, "Try again." And the planet listened, not with ears but with matter. Gases collided, bonds broke and formed, complex molecules emerged and dissolved over and over again. These weren't cells, not yet, but they were chapters in the same book, and the book was beginning to write itself. Every time the surface cooled, pools would form, shallow, acidic, strange. In them the building blocks of life gathered like dancers at the edge of a stage, waiting for the music to start. They didn't know they were becoming something, but becoming they were. Bonds of water and ice. There's a strange twist in this story. Some of Earth's water may have come from outer space. Icy asteroids, born in the frozen reaches beyond Jupiter, were drawn toward the sun, and Earth was in their path. When they collided with our molten planet, they delivered more than destruction. They delivered water, frozen, ancient water that would help fill the oceans, that would cradle early molecules, that would one day fall as rain, move through roots, and trickle through the veins of trees and people. Imagine that some of the water in your body may have been born in the dark corners of space. So even in chaos, there was a gift. Even in fire, something pure was placed into the world, the unwritten sky. There's something peaceful about knowing that the sky you see today wasn't always there, that the blue you take for granted was once a veil of poison, that the stars were once hid, that even light had to wait its turn. During the Hadean, the atmosphere was too thick for starlight to pass through. The heavens were blocked, and the surface remained alone, illuminated only by fire and flashes. But slowly the atmosphere began to thin, particles settled, winds carried ash away. The sun, once a ghost, began to pierce through in golden streaks, and eventually, a sky was born, not blue yet, but visible, real, a canvas waiting for stories. And beneath it, Earth, still wild, still churning, still violent, had begun to calm, not into stillness, but into rhythm, a place to begin. By the end of the Hadean, Earth had something it didn't have before, not life, but a place where life could happen. There were oceans now, warm, unstable, shallow in some places, deep in others. There were land masses, broken and shifting. There was a sky, a crust, a whisper of atmosphere, and in quiet, sheltered places, along coastlines, near volcanic vents, in tiny pools evaporating and filling again, there were molecules, just molecules, but not the ordinary kind, the kind that could change shape, that could store information, that could begin to remember. This is where the next part of the story begins, not with planets, but with possibilities, not with organisms, but with order. The Earth had prepared its canvas, it had layered the paint, and now the brush was hovering, not yet touching, but close, so close, and somewhere, in the quiet of a tide pool, or the darkness of a hydrothermal vent, or the warmth of a muddy puddle kissed by starlight, something stirs, a molecule forms, it copies itself, and refuses to stop, not for a reason, but because it can, and just like that, the silence begins to fade. It's hard to imagine now that water wasn't always here. The oceans, the clouds, the rivers, they weren't part of Earth's beginning. They arrived slowly, unexpectedly, And when they did, the planet changed forever. Imagine Earth still cooling from its chaotic youth, steam rising from 1,000 fractures, lightning dancing across the sky like nervous energy. Now imagine, for the very first time, the sky letting go, and rain falling. Not a spring shower, not a calm drizzle, but a flood that lasted centuries. Rain that sculpted the surface, rain that carried with it the beginning of memory. Because water is not just a substance, it is a stage, a place where molecules meet, where chemistry becomes choreography, where time begins to loop. And in that looping, life was quietly waiting for its chance, a gift from the stars. Some of the water that now fills our oceans may be older than the Earth itself, born in distant parts of the solar system, frozen into comets and icy asteroids. It was delivered to our world in waves, literally of impacts. Each collision violent, each one a threat to life that didn't yet exist. But inside those cosmic messengers was water, and with each crash, Earth became a little more like the place we know today, a little less fire, a little more flow. You might be drinking some of it now, water that crossed light years, water that burned through the atmosphere, water that once boiled on the newborn Earth and settled again into pools and oceans. It's strange to think of water as a traveler, but that's exactly what it is, a timeless witness to everything that came after. The shape of oceans. As the Earth's crust cooled, it cracked and folded, forming the basins that would become the oceans. Water poured in, from rain, from underground steam, from space, and over time, the planet became something entirely new, a water world. The oceans didn't just fill space, they shaped it. They changed how heat moved through the crust. They smoothed jagged lands into shorelines. They slowed the pace of the planet's violence. Water doesn't conquer, it calms, it holds. It invites molecules to stay longer, to linger in one place, to begin weaving more complex stories. Have you ever watched the tide, the way it rises and falls, not in a hurry, but with purpose? That rhythm began here, and it would become the heartbeat of life, where molecules learn to remember. The ocean wasn't just wet, it was warm, and full of ingredients: hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, all the ancient alphabet of chemistry, swirling in a planet-sized bowl, and energy, from sunlight above, and volcanic heat below, kept stirring the mix. In some places, shallow tide pools dried in the day and refilled at night. In others, underwater vents hissed mineral-rich water into the depths, and in this endless cycle of heating and cooling, of dissolving and reforming, molecules began to organize, not because they knew how, but because the water allowed them to try, again, and again and again. In still air, things stop. In dry places, things crack. But in water, things move. They swirl. They explore. The ocean was not just a setting. It was a collaborator, a gentle teacher, giving simple molecules the chance to try something remarkable, to become patterns, to become systems, to become something more. The library of the sea. Imagine a single molecule, long, fragile, curling in the tide like seaweed. It doesn't think, it doesn't breathe, but it holds a shape, and that shape can copy itself. That's not just chemistry anymore, that's memory. Memory is the beginning of identity, and in the oceans of early Earth, memory became possible, not in brains, not in thoughts, but in molecules that could remember their shape and pass that shape on. Over time, these tiny strands became more stable, more persistent, more curious. They wrapped themselves in bubbles of fat. They floated in little pockets of protection, and they learned how to feed, how to change, how to survive, all without knowing, all without eyes or language, just rhythm, just replication, just the quiet determination of water. Have you ever listened to waves lapping at the shore? That's the sound of Earth, remembering how to be alive. Where heat meets thought, in the deep oceans, volcanic vents rose like chimneys from the seafloor. They spewed scalding, mineral-rich water into the surrounding cold. And in these places, where heat met stillness, life may have had one of its first safe havens. Here cells may have formed, not all at once, not in perfection, but slowly, shells of fat and protein, internal chemistry, tiny engines built from chance and time. These weren't creatures in any way we'd recognize, but they were complete. They could feed, they could grow, they could divide, and in dividing, they told a story, one that would be copied for billions of years. Your cells still carry pieces of tiny mitochondria, once separate life forms, now part of you, whispering memories from a time before bones, before thoughts, before dreams. You are a cathedral built from oceans, and the oceans still remember the stillness that made it possible. It's easy to look at life and see energy, heartbeat, movement, flight, speech, but life began in stillness, not a sprint, but a slow unfolding, like tea steeping in warm water, like ink spreading through silk, and water made that stillness possible. It slowed things down, and in doing so gave them time, time to connect, time to stabilize, time to discover new arrangements, some that lasted only moments, others, forever. Have you ever floated in water with your ears below the surface? That muffled quiet, that cradle of pressure and rhythm, that's what life felt like in the beginning. A gentle suspension between chemistry and awareness. What the ocean knew, the ocean didn't think, but it held everything needed for thought to one day emerge. It didn't speak, but it taught every cell how to listen. And even now, the ocean is where life still begins, not just in the ancient past, but every day, in the womb, in the tide pools, in the deep, because life remembers where it started. Water is more than backdrop, it is origin, and in its patience, in its quiet, in its steady embrace, it gave Earth something it never had before, a way to become, not just to exist, but to become, to evolve, to change, to wonder, and soon, so very soon, that wonder would take shape, not in water alone, but in what the water carried. Life in its next form would find a way to build a cell, a boundary, a home, not to protect itself from the world, but to make sense of it. And with that, Earth would take another step, not loud, not grand, but irreversible. There's a moment in every story when something vague becomes something real. A shimmer turns into a shape, a breath becomes a voice, a ripple finds its edge. Tonight, we drift into the moment Earth discovered boundaries, when the soup of the oceans became the seed of the cell, when the molecules that wandered freely built walls around themselves and called it home. Up until now, life was almost a suggestion, chains of molecules replicating in puddles, bubbles of fat drifting in tide pools, no purpose, no control, no self. But somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of ocean and energy, something changed, something simple but powerful. A membrane formed, not to keep the world out, but to begin defining what was in. This was not a fortress, it was a doorway, and it marked the beginning of biology as we know it. The cell had arrived, the first true home. Imagine you are that first cell. You don't have thoughts, you don't have senses, but you exist, in a way, nothing ever has before. Inside your boundary, molecules swirl, proteins fold, information floats in fragile strands of RNA. Outside, the ocean continues, vast, ancient, ever-changing, and yet, within you, there is order, not complex, but intentional. You are a capsule of stability, floating through a world that never stops moving, and somehow, you hold yourself together. That boundary, soft, permeable, curious, is your first gift, because with it, you are no longer just part of the world. You are a system, a unit, a self, the power of inside and outside. It's easy to take boundaries for granted, but before this moment, there was no inside, no self, no space, where life could manage its own story. With a membrane, the cell could control its chemistry. It could hold important molecules close and keep the chaos out. It could gather energy, build tools, copy itself with more care. In short, it could survive longer, and in surviving, it could change. You might think a wall is something that separates, but for the first cells it was a way to belong, to have a center, to make decisions. even if they weren't conscious ones. This was the first moment life took responsibility for itself, not just reacting, but organizing. RNA, the early messenger. Inside these early cells lived something fragile, but astonishing. Strands of RNA. They didn't yet have DNA stability. They weren't protected by a nucleus, but they carried instructions, little patterns, like recipes for building simple tools, enzymes, proteins, structures. RNA didn't just store information, it passed it on. It evolved, it experimented, and over time these strands found ways to make copies of themselves better, to build better membranes, to harvest more energy. Life was still tiny, invisible, unthinking, but it was learning, and it was learning fast. This wasn't a sudden leap, it was a long, meandering path, full of false starts and failures. But life doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to continue. Metabolism, eating without a mouth. The first cells didn't eat in the way you or I do. They absorbed, they reacted, they captured energy from chemicals drifting in the sea, sulfur, iron, hydrogen. These reactions, quiet, invisible, powered the inside of the cell. Imagine tiny engines, spinning without fuel tanks. Imagine little tools, folding and unfolding with chemical grace. This was metabolism, the choreography of staying alive. Even now, in your cells, these ancient reactions still happen. You are full of echoes, little engines, little memories, running the same routines from a time before time. Isn't it strange that something as complex as a human heartbeat can trace its origin to a bubble in the ocean, learning how to manage energy, reproduction, the first copy? Eventually the cell does something incredible, something no rock, no wind, no ocean ever did. It copies itself, not just fragments, not just molecules, but all of it. The entire cell splits, and from one, there are now two. It's hard to say when exactly this first happened. No fossils remain, no witnesses, but we know it did, because you are here, and you are made of cells, each one tracing its history back to that first division, that first duplication of a self. Reproduction wasn't a goal, it was a side effect, but it made all the difference. It made life exponential. Variation, the birth of difference, and with copying came mistakes, tiny errors in replication, tiny shifts in chemistry, not always good, not always bad, just different. And difference is the seed of evolution. Now, instead of a single kind of cell drifting in the sea, there were many. Some were better at absorbing energy, some built stronger walls, some floated faster, some stayed closer to heat. And over time, these differences began to matter. You could think of it like an orchestra warming up. At first, there's no melody, just scattered noise. But then, patterns emerge, themes repeat, rhythms form. Life was finding its key. Community in the sea. It's easy to imagine early life as lonely, but it wasn't. The oceans were becoming crowded. Cells bumped into each other. Some competed, some helped, some merged. They shared genetic material. They formed simple colonies. They even began cooperating. Life wasn't just multiplying, it was networking. Little communities of survival, little alliances of chemistry. And while they had no thoughts, no eyes, no language, they were building the groundwork for everything that would come next. A boundary that gave birth to everything. That soft membrane, that first fragile wall, was the moment Earth stopped being just a planet and became a garden. The garden was invisible, but it was alive. Tiny worlds within the world, each one with its own logic, its own chemistry, its own story, and all of them carried inside the memory of water, the power of energy, and the daring idea that something small could choose to hold itself together. The cell didn't need permission, it didn't need instructions, it simply kept going, because that's what life does. It continues. The gentle next step. There's no moment when single-celled life suddenly becomes complex, just many slow steps, and many quiet breakthroughs. But eventually, one cell swallowed another, not as a predator, but as a partner, and something incredible began to form. Not just a cell, but a team. And so, as the oceans whispered and the sky grew lighter, life prepared to change again, not to survive the world, but to shape it. And in doing so it would write the next chapter, not alone, but together. In the beginning, life was small. It drifted. It multiplied. It survived. Each tiny cell, a world unto itself, kept its chemistry sealed behind a soft, living wall. But over time, something changed. Some of those cells stopped doing everything alone. They started living together, and in doing so, they opened the door to something the planet had never seen before: complexity. Tonight, we explore the moment life became a team, when cells began working together, not just by accident, but by design, and how that decision reshaped the future of everything. The power of two. It might surprise you to know your cells are not made from one kind of life, but two. Long ago, one ancient cell, floating in the ocean, living on simple chemistry, engulfed another. Maybe it was hungry, maybe it was curious, maybe it just made a mistake. But something strange happened. The cell it swallowed didn't die. It didn't get digested. It stayed. And inside that host cell, it kept doing what it had always done, processing oxygen, generating energy. And suddenly, the host cell had more power, more fuel, more life. It was the beginning of a partnership, a merger, an alliance so successful you are still made from it today. Those swallowed cells became your mitochondria, tiny engines inside every cell of your body. They have their own DNA, their own history, and they've been with us for billions of years. Endosymbiosis, a quiet revolution. This relationship, one cell living inside another, is called endosymbiosis. It didn't just happen once, it happened again. Other cells took in photosynthetic bacteria, cells that could turn sunlight into sugar, and with that, plants were born, green life, sun-powered life, oceans blooming with new kinds of cells, all because of a simple idea: don't destroy, combine. In a universe filled with conflict, life chose cooperation, not because it was noble, but because it worked. Together, cells could do more, share tasks, split responsibilities, handle more complexity without falling apart. And so, the path to multicellular life was opened. Why be one when you can be many? Imagine two cells side by side. One does everything itself. It eats, moves, replicates, repairs, adapts. It is strong, but limited. The other, it lives in a cluster. It only does one job, maybe gathering nutrients. But nearby, another cell handles waste. Another helps with movement. Another takes care of reproduction. Together, they are more than the sum of their parts. And together, they survive things the single cell never could. This was the quiet brilliance of cooperation. Not louder, not faster, but deeper. Suddenly, evolution wasn't just about improving the individual, but about building systems. The first multicellular creatures. The fossil record doesn't give us perfect answers, but we know that somewhere around 2 billion years ago, life began forming into colonies. Cells clumped together. They stuck. They communicated in simple ways with chemicals and pressure. And over generations, those clumps became more organized. Some cells took on new shapes. Some began sacrificing their ability to reproduce, just to support the group. It may not sound dramatic, but this was the start of bodies. Not single cells, but tissues, structures, organisms. It was slow, it was uneven, but it was unstoppable. Like snow building into glaciers, like letters forming into sentences, life was learning how to grow together. Specialization, the art of letting go. One of the most beautiful parts of this transformation was the emergence of specialization. Imagine a group of cells living as one creature. Some begin to focus only on movement, others on digesting food, others on defense. Each cell gives up something to do one thing better, and the creature becomes stronger, more efficient, more capable. This is what your own body does every day. Skin cells protect, muscle cells pull, neurons think, blood cells carry, and each one depends completely on the others to survive. It's strange, isn't it? That strength comes not from doing more, but from doing less. Together, the dawn of shape. As multicellular life evolved, it began to take form, not just function, but shape. Filaments, tubes, sheets. Cells arranged themselves in patterns. Some creatures floated, Some crawled, some stayed still, absorbing sunlight or catching nutrients from water that passed by. Every design a test, every failure a step forward. Evolution didn't need a plan, it only needed persistence. And through slow generational experiments, life began crafting shapes that could move, shapes that could sense, shapes that could touch the world in new ways. Complexity wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a slow unfolding, like petals opening at dawn. Communication begins. Inside these growing creatures, a new challenge emerged. How do you keep all your cells working together? The answer was communication. Cells began sending signals, chemical messages, electrical pulses, tiny whispers through tissues, little nudges, little alert. I need energy. I've been injured. It's time to divide. These were not thoughts, but they were intelligence, the beginnings of a system that would one day become a nervous system. Life was learning to talk to itself, and in doing so, it opened the door to awareness, the fragile beauty of cooperation. Cooperation sounds ideal, but it's not always easy. Cells that refused to specialize could disrupt the group. Cells that copied themselves too much became dangerous. Even now, this ancient tension lives on. We call it cancer, a cell that forgets it's part of a team. But life responded. It evolved defenses, ways to detect, to correct, to remember the balance. And so, even in fragility, life held together, because the advantages of being many, of building something larger than yourself, were worth the risk. Maybe that's still true, for cells, for ecosystems, for us, a new kind of Earth. By this point in Earth's history, something had changed permanently. The oceans were not just filled with life, they were filled with organisms, creatures with shape, with size, with structure. Algae covered the water's surface, sponges formed on the seafloor, simple animals, soft and strange, drifted on the currents, and all of them came from the same ancient idea: don't survive alone, build something together. And so, Earth, once fire and rock, now held forests of cells, gardens of collaboration, and soon, those gardens would evolve teeth. You might think of evolution as slow, and it often is, a quiet shaping over eons, so subtle you can barely see it. But sometimes, it leaps. Tonight, we float into one of those moments, a chapter in Earth's story, when life, for reasons we still don't fully understand, began to try everything at once. Strange shapes, new senses, motion, hunger, fear, a bloom, not of flowers, but of forms. And it began in the sea. It's called the Cambrian explosion, a time about 540 million years ago, when evolution opened the floodgates, and life, already long in the making, finally let itself get creative. Before the bloom, for billions of years life stayed simple, single-celled, then colonial, then softly multicellular, sheets of cells, tiny tubes, floating fans in the ocean. It was enough, and Earth was quiet, but complexity had been building behind the scenes. Cells had learned how to cooperate, genes had learned how to copy and shuffle, and ecosystems, though small, had begun to interact. Energy flowed, waste recycled, survival became a game of balance. And then, something tipped. We don't know exactly why. Maybe it was oxygen levels, maybe it was climate, maybe it was just time. But whatever the reason, life bloomed, and it bloomed strangely. Have you ever looked into a tide pool and seen creatures that make no sense? Jellies, crabs, sea cucumbers, creatures that seem like dreams. This was the moment those dreams were born. The blueprint inside, one of the quiet miracles behind the Cambrian bloom, was a set of genetic tools called Hox genes. They don't build life directly, they're more like stage directions, telling cells where to grow arms, or tails or mouths. And when those genes arrived, life gained a new kind of control over its own shape. Suddenly bodies weren't just possible, they were programmable. And evolution, that patient artist, started sketching wild new designs. Spines, tentacles, shells, eyes, so many eyes. This wasn't just biology, it was invention, not random, but deeply curious. The sea becomes a stage, Now imagine the oceans during this time, not the blue, quiet waters you know today, but dense with life, a jungle beneath the waves, creatures with armor plating, long, soft worms covered in spines, mouths lined with teeth in places you wouldn't expect, tiny trilobites scuttling over the sea floor, weird swimmers with fins that flapped like wings, some with no eyes, some with 30. Life was experimenting, testing combinations, folding and unfolding what a body could be. And for the first time in Earth's history, things began to chase each other, predator and prey. Before the Cambrian, most life simply absorbed nutrients. It didn't hunt, it didn't run. But now, in this new world of motion, some creatures learn to follow, to track, to grab, to eat, and others, they learn to hide, to armor themselves, to dig, predator and prey, a new kind of relationship, one that would shape evolution forever. Because when survival becomes a chase, every scent sharpens, every move matters, eyes become more focused, reflexes quicker, intelligence possible. And just like that, the arms race began, not of weapons, but of design. Fossils from dreams. You can still see the remains of these strange creatures today. Fossils trapped in ancient rock, slices of time from long before bones. Some look familiar, like distant ancestors of crabs or snails. Others look like nothing we've ever seen since. Creatures like Opabinia, with 5 eyes and a long claw for a mouth, or Hallucigenia, a spiky worm that looks upside down even when it's not, or Anomalocaris, a predator with fins on the side and a circular mouth full of teeth. These weren't mistakes, they were possibilities. Life was dreaming aloud, and the ocean listened. Imagine walking through a gallery of forgotten blueprints. That's what the Cambrian was, a museum of what life could be. Why now? We still don't fully understand what caused the Cambrian bloom, but we have ideas. One is oxygen. The ocean finally held enough of it to support larger, more active creatures. Another is innovation. Genes had reached a level of flexibility that allowed rapid experimentation, and ecosystems, once slow, had reached a tipping point of complexity. Whatever the cause, it wasn't an explosion of noise. It was an unfolding of potential, like spring arriving in the sea. And while not every creature from this bloom survived, the ones that did, they carried the future inside them, the legacy of the strange. So much of what we are today, how we move, see, eat, sense, has roots in the Cambrian sea. Eyes that could detect shapes, nerves that could carry signals, limbs that could bend, mouths that could chew. It wasn't just weird, it was foundational. The bizarre became the blueprint, and from it came insects, and fish, and amphibians, and mammals. And you are a descendant of creatures you barely recognize, built on experiments that began in silent oceans, so long ago, still blooming. The Cambrian didn't end with a bang, it blended into the next era. Creatures continued to evolve, new body plans emerged, but the pace had changed. Still curious, still creative, but more focused, as if life had found a direction. The bloom was not a one-time gift, it was a promise that life would always search for new shapes, new ways to feel, new ways to be. And deep beneath that creative chaos, something else was shifting. The land once barren was about to be discovered, and life was ready to crawl out of the sea. The ocean had given life its rhythm. It had cradled the first cells, calmed the first communities, inspired the first shapes. But eventually, the sea began to feel small, not in size, but in possibility. And so, very slowly, very cautiously, life lifted its eyes above the surface. It didn't rush, it didn't climb, it crept. It drifted into the shallows, paused at the edge, and eventually touched land. Tonight we follow that moment, the moment the waterline was no longer a boundary, but an invitation, and Earth, for the first time, began to breathe. A silent world of rock and sky. Before life, land was quiet. No grass, no birdsong, no buzzing insects or footprints in the mud. Just wind, stone, sunlight drifting over a surface that had never known touch. For billions of years, Earth's continents were empty, weathered only by wind and rain, cracked by tectonic shifts, painted red with iron and volcanic ash. The only color came from minerals. The only movement came from clouds. But change was brewing beneath the tide, because some creatures were learning how to tolerate dryness, and some had already begun the journey, the first to step ashore. It began with the small ones. Cyanobacteria, the ancient architects of the atmosphere, had started forming mats near the water's edge. They clung to rocks, to sand, to shorelines kissed by the tide, and slowly the land that had once been bare began to darken. A film of life, a shimmer of green. These early pioneers didn't need roots. They soaked in light, they captured carbon, and they held the soil together, one thin layer at a time. Later came the fungi, invisible networks underground, breaking down rock, helping plants find water, forming partnerships before roots even existed, and together, the microbes and the mycelium, they began building a foundation, not of stone, but of life. The rise of plants. Eventually something happened that changed the surface of Earth forever. A group of algae, cousins of seaweed, developed structures that let them survive outside water, at least for a while. They evolved cuticles to hold in moisture, stomata to breathe through pores, and most importantly, roots to hold them down. These were the first land plants, mosses, liverworts, tiny fragile things by today's standards, but radical at the time. They softened the surface, caught rainfall, created shade, invited new kinds of chemistry, and with them came oxygen, not just in the oceans now, but in the sky above land. The air was changing, the temperature too, and life began to settle in. Plants didn't just decorate the land, they became the land. They held the soil, they shaped the rivers, they slowed erosion. The land, once static, now responded. It bloomed. The problem of gravity. Moving onto land wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a challenge. In water, everything is supported. Creatures can float, drift, grow tall with no bones. But on land, gravity is a constant weight, and early life had to adapt. Muscles had to push harder, structures had to stiffen, cells had to find ways to hold shape without collapsing. And then there was desiccation, drying out. Land meant exposure, to sun, to wind, to drought. Only the strongest, or the most creative, survived. But those that did, rewrote the rules of survival. They grew thicker skins, built vessels to carry water inside themselves, developed ways to reproduce, without needing pools to spawn in. They learned how to stand, and in doing so, they opened the sky. The first forests. As plants evolved, so did their ambition. They grew taller, wider, more complex. Ferns, club mosses, early trees. These weren't forests as we know them now, but they were enough to change the world. They pulled carbon from the air, released oxygen in abundance, cooled the climate, thickened the soil, and beneath their shade, the land grew softer, richer, more alive. The forests welcomed fungi, insects, eventually, vertebrates, and the land, once fire and stone, became a sanctuary. The brave crawl of animals. Around this time, some creatures from the ocean began exploring the edge, not leaping, but creeping. Early arthropods, ancestors of insects and spiders, were among the first. They scuttled across damp shorelines, tunneled beneath decaying leaves, fed on the new feast of moss and fungus. Later came the tetrapods, four-limbed creatures evolved from fish. They breathed air, moved awkwardly across the mud, pushed their bodies forward using limbs that had once been fins. Their bones grew stronger, lungs more efficient, skins more sealed. Each generation, a little braver than the last. And one day, a creature crossed the tide line, and didn't return, not because it couldn't, but because it didn't need to. Land had become a home, the sound of a new world. With life on land came something new, sound. Waves had always made noise, but forests, they sang, leaves rustling, insects buzzing, creatures calling to each other across canopies of green. The air, once empty, now carried memory, and the sunlight, once harsh on bare rock, now flickered through branches. Shadows moved. Seasons began to matter. The sky felt closer. Life had changed the color of the continents, from gray and red to green and gold, and with each passing era, it climbed higher, rooted deeper, breathed fuller. Earth was no longer just a planet with oceans. It had landscapes, weather, cycles, and the life that once only floated, now walked, now climbed, now watched the stars. Each grain of sand, touched, at some point by a cell that decided to leave the water. You are standing on the result of billions of experiments, creatures that climbed out of comfort and found something waiting above the tide. Land wasn't a place to escape to, it was a place to expand into, to transform, to explore, and evolution never looked back. But something else was coming, as life filled the land, as forests reached upward, as creatures multiplied in every corner of the earth. A shadow began to form, because life would not always win, and Earth was not finished testing it. Life had climbed onto land. It had rooted in the soil, spread across valleys, crawled through rivers, and filled the air with movement and song. Forests towered, insects ruled the skies, amphibians became reptiles, and the world seemed to settle into a rhythm. But sometimes, even rhythm breaks. Tonight, we drift through the silence that followed, not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of absence. This is the story of the Great Dying, the most devastating extinction event in Earth's history. Not a pause, not a stumble, but a reset, and somehow, life survived it. Let's begin. A full world, then empty. The world 20-50 million years ago was vibrant. A supercontinent called Pangaea stretched across much of the planet. Its surface hosted lush forests, wide deserts, deep swamps. Oceans were rich with coral reefs, trilobites, and strange fish. On land, early reptiles roamed, their bodies adapting to drier air and shifting seasons. It was a time of innovation, of diversity, of stability. Until it wasn't, something began to change. The skies grew darker, the oceans grew warmer, the winds shifted, and slowly, terrifyingly, Earth began to unravel. The cause, we still debate it, but all signs point to the deep belly of the planet, and the awakening of something massive. Fire from below, in what's now Siberia, a volcanic event, unlike anything before or since, began to erupt, not for days, not for weeks, but for hundreds of thousands of years. Fissures in the crust poured lava across millions of square kilometers. Vast rivers of molten rock transformed the land into something alien. But it wasn't just the lava, it was what the lava unleashed. Carbon dioxide, methane, toxic gases that flooded the air and changed the sky. Greenhouse gases turned the atmosphere into a blanket too thick to breathe through. Temperatures soared, oceans acidified, rain turned to acid, and oxygen, the invisible breath that life depended on, began to vanish. The planet did not explode, it suffocated. Extinction has no sound. Extinction doesn't happen all at once. It moves in waves. First, the sensitive creatures disappear: coral plankton, amphibians. Then predators starve. Then forests die. Then the soil erodes. Each disappearance makes the next more certain. Each loss ripples outward, and eventually, entire ecosystems collapse. This wasn't a localized disaster, it was global. Across land and sea, almost every species vanished. Scientists estimate that over 90% of marine life and 70% of land species went extinct. No dinosaurs, no mammals, no flowering plants, just survivors, hidden, fragile, waiting. Even now, when you dig into the rocks from that era, you find black layers, thick with carbon, but empty of life. Fossils stop, shells vanish. The story goes quiet, but not forever. What survived? In the wake of disaster, it wasn't the strongest that endured. It was the smallest, the simplest, the ones that could hide, adapt, persist. Tiny burrowing animals, hardy microbes, seeds with thick coats, ferns, insects, some early reptiles. The Great Dying was not the end. It was a narrow doorway, and some creatures squeezed through. Sometimes, Life survives not because it's grand, but because it bends, because it waits, because it lets go of what once worked and tries again. From those survivors, Earth would rebuild, not by recreating the past, but by inventing something new. The sky clears. Eventually, the volcanoes fell silent. The skies cleared. The oceans cooled. The carbon in the air began to settle into rock and soil. The atmosphere breathed easier, and life, battered, broken, reduced to whispers, began to hum again. Plants returned. The seas rippled with tiny swimmers. Insects spread their wings. Reptiles grew larger, not all at once, but steadily. With each new generation, life filled the spaces that had been emptied, and Earth, though changed, remembered how to bloom. What Earth learned: the great dying wasn't a punishment, it wasn't a cleansing, it was a symptom of imbalance, of forces buried deep in the planet, of fragile systems pushed beyond what they could endure. And yet, it left behind something extraordinary, a world cleared for reinvention, and life, always the patient artist, began to sculpt again. New predators, new plants, new ways of moving, breathing, reproducing, and among these new experiments came a lineage that would lead to the dinosaurs. But that is another part of the story. What matters here is the silence, and the song that rose after it. Extinction is not the end. It's easy to think of extinction as failure, but in Earth's history, it's also transformation. Each great loss opens space for something unexpected. Each collapse teaches life a new way to survive. Even today, the echoes of that mass extinction live on, in your lungs, which trace back to air-breathing reptiles, in your blood, which once flowed through simpler bodies that barely held on, in the diversity of life around you shaped by billions of years of recovery. Extinction prunes, but it does not erase, and life never forgets how to return. So when we speak of the great dying, we are not mourning, we are remembering that fragility is not failure, and that life is, above all, persistent. The story doesn't stop. The surface of Earth has burned, frozen, suffocated, flooded, and yet here you are, breathing, listening, wondering. You are proof that somewhere, life always continued. Somewhere, even in the darkness, something tried again. And soon life would not just return, it would rise to unimaginable heights, towering giants, feathered hunters, new sounds in the wind, because Earth's next experiment was bold, and hungry, and beautiful, and it began with the dinosaurs. From the silence of extinction, Earth began to hum again. It started softly, with ferns curling upward, with insects crawling through ash, with small reptiles blinking in the new light of a sky reborn. But over time, the whispers became roars, and Earth entered an era, not just of survival, but of grandeur. Tonight, we drift into that chapter, when life grew bold again, when it stretched its limbs, lengthened its necks, spread its wings, and shook the ground with every step. The age of dinosaurs, a time when the Earth was not just alive, but in motion. Out of the ashes, after the great dying, the world was nearly empty, but that emptiness didn't last. Survivors evolved quickly to fill the open spaces. The forests returned, first with hardy plants, then great cycads, and towering conifers. The seas shimmered with new species of fish and coral, and on land, reptiles, those clever dry-skinned descendants of amphibians, began to thrive. Some stayed small, some grew armored, some walked on 2 legs instead of 4, and a few became something entirely new. They became dinosaurs. Not monsters, not mistakes, but one of life's most successful and imaginative experiments. What is a dinosaur? You might be surprised to learn that dinosaurs weren't defined by their size, or their teeth, or their ferocity. They were defined by their hips, their posture, their bones, lightweight, air-filled, optimized. Dinosaurs stood differently than the reptiles before them. They moved with grace, with balance, with confidence, and soon, they diversified into thousands of species, some as small as chickens, others longer than city buses. They weren't just predators. Many were peaceful, slow, social. Some nested in colonies, some traveled in herds, some even cared for their young. Dinosaurs were more than beasts. They were communities. The world they inherited, the Earth of the dinosaur era, the Mesozoic, was warm, lush, strange. There were no grasses yet, no flowers, no mammals larger than a cat, but the forests stretched wide, filled with ferns, towering trees, and the deep shadows perfect for hiding. The continents were still drifting. Pangaea had begun to split apart, forming new coastlines, new mountains, new weather, and wherever land existed, dinosaurs followed. They adapted to every ecosystem: swamps, deserts, river valleys, and volcanic plains. They were not visitors, they were rulers, and for more than 160 million years, they shaped the rhythm of life on Earth. Longer than mammals have existed, longer than flowers have bloomed, longer than the distance between the first pyramid and you, the quiet ones. Not all dinosaurs were terrifying. Some were gentle giants, creatures like Brachiosaurus, with necks that reached the canopy. They ate constantly, moving like islands across the land. Others, like Stegosaurus, were armored tanks, slow but steady, decorated with plates and spikes, not for attack, but for defense, or perhaps display. And then there were the small ones, nimble runners like Hypsilophodon, with curious eyes and fast legs. They were prey, but they were clever. They watched the shadows, they remembered escape paths, they knew when to run. These dinosaurs were not just background, they were part of the great balance, and they thrived because they didn't try to dominate. They adapted. The predators, of course there were also hunters: Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus, later, Tyrannosaurus, each one sculpted by evolution to do one thing well: survive by pursuit. Sharp teeth, forward-facing eyes, massive legs with muscle like coiled rope. But they weren't mindless. They were strategic. They tracked. They ambushed. They studied their surroundings. And many were likely feathered, not for flight, but for warmth, for color, for courtship. Yes, even the fiercest beasts might have danced, because dinosaurs weren't just survivors. They were performers, inventors, learners. Feathers before flight. One of the most beautiful truths about dinosaurs is this: they didn't vanish, not completely, because some of them became birds. The connection is not poetic, it's genetic. Birds are dinosaurs, feathered, flying, modern echoes of the ancient sky. Long before they took flight, dinosaurs had feathers, for insulation, for display, maybe even for gliding between trees. And somewhere along the line, those feathers found the wind and lifted life off the ground. So when you hear a sparrow sing, or watch a hawk glide overhead, you are witnessing something ancient, a dinosaur dream, still alive, a world in motion. The age of dinosaurs was more than just teeth and thunder. It was a time of symphonies in ecosystems: pterosaurs gliding across sunsets, cicadas buzzing in humid air, insects pollinating the first primitive flowers. Yes, flowers began here too, tiny blooms, experimenting with scent and color, luring insects in for trade. Life wasn't just growing, it was becoming beautiful. The earth, once scarred and scorched, was now painting itself in detail, textures, patterns, sounds. And dinosaurs were not outside of it, they were part of the brushstroke. But even the most brilliant canvases don't last forever. The day the sky fell, you've likely heard of the ending: the asteroid, the firestorm, the sudden dark. But that moment came long after dinosaurs had lived their full story. They had risen after extinction. They had explored every niche. They had survived climate shifts and continental drift. Their fall was not failure, it was a turning of the page. And that story, the one we'll enter next, will begin with ash, and open again with mammals, and lead eventually to us. But not yet. Tonight, let the ground settle, let the trees sway, let the herds gather once more, because for now, this is still their world. The age of giants, of feathers, of thunder in the soil. And somewhere, in a quiet nest, a small creature twitches in its sleep, unaware that history is about to change again. The sky darkened. The winds turned cold. Ash drifted like snowfall across the land. For a moment in Earth's long story, the world went quiet again. Not from silence, but from loss. The impact had come suddenly. A rock from space, larger than a mountain, traveling faster than sound. It struck the Yucatan Peninsula, sending shockwaves through oceans, turning forests into fire and sky into shadow. This was not just an ending for the dinosaurs, it was a reset, once more. And yet, in the dark, beneath the soil, inside hollow logs, under piles of leaves, life held on, not loudly, but persistently. Tonight, we rest in that quiet aftermath and follow the creatures who waited patiently until the giants were gone. The night after thunder, in the first days after the impact, the Earth was a different planet. Fires raged, skies dimmed for years, the temperature dropped, rain turned acidic, plants withered, seas emptied, and almost everything larger than a suitcase disappeared. But deep underground, in burrows and roots, in hidden nests and forest crevices, small mammals stirred. They had always lived in the background, in the shadows, in the places dinosaurs ignored. They were warm-blooded, furred, quick. They nursed their young in secret. They traveled at night. They stayed out of the way. And now, for the first time, the way was open. It wasn't triumph, it was opportunity, and the mammals took it. Who survived? Not all mammals made it through the darkness, but those who did shared something in common. They were small, adaptable, omnivorous, and good at hiding. They could eat many things. They could live in many places. They could reproduce quickly, care for their young, and respond to change. In a world filled with uncertainty, that kind of flexibility was everything. Some resembled shrews, some looked like rodents, none looked like us, but inside their cells, the story of mammals was beginning to unfold. It would be slow, it would take tens of millions of years, but the blueprint was there, a body that stayed warm, a brain that could adapt, a bond between parent and child, strong enough to pass on more than just genes, but behavior, and that changed everything. Why warm-blooded matters. Being warm-blooded is expensive. It takes energy, constant feeding, internal systems always at work, but it also gives something precious in return. Independence from the cold, endurance, awake minds in the dark. Mammals could forage in cold nights, survive winters, raise young in burrows insulated from the chaos above, and their bodies, not covered in scales, but in fur, retained the heat they needed. This warmth wasn't just physical, it was a metaphor for presence, for potential. Life wasn't just clinging now, it was recovering, and mammals were part of that healing. The return of green. As the skies cleared, plants began to reclaim the world. Ferns came first, like they always do after a fire, then shrubs, then flowering plants, delicate and ambitious. The world turned green again, and with green came insects, and with insects came appetite. Mammals evolved sharper teeth, faster limbs, more complex senses. Some climbed, some burrowed, some chased, some hid. Every strategy was tried, and slowly a new balance began to form. The age of reptiles had ended, but the age of mammals had only just begun. And Earth, as always, embraced what came next. The forests of innovation. Mammals evolved in the forest. These weren't the forests of today. No grasses, no apples, no hummingbirds yet, but thick canopies, fruiting trees, webs of roots and shade. Here mammals learned to jump, to grip, to balance. Eyes moved forward for depth. Fingers grew dexterous. Brains expanded. Some became gliders. Some became swimmers. Some stayed small. Others grew. The world had room again, and mammals were beginning to fill it. The whisper of social life. Among mammals, something else was stirring. Sociality. Some species began forming groups, nurturing young longer, teaching behavior through action, not just instinct. Mothers fed their young with milk. Parents guarded nests together. Communities learned from one another, and in some of those groups, something very quiet and very powerful began to take root. Memory, emotion, connection, not just reacting to the world, but understanding it. It wasn't consciousness yet, but it was close. The early sketch of thought, predators and prey. With time, mammals diversified into hunters and hunted, sharp teeth for carnivores, grinding molars for plant eaters. They competed with birds, with snakes, with each other. Some began walking on two legs, some returned to the sea, some, high in the trees, began to look a little like primates. But for now, Earth was still a canvas being redrawn. No humans, no wolves, no elephants, just millions of stories beginning at once, each one small, but meaningful, each one a seed of something larger, the humble origins of giants. It's easy to imagine evolution as a march towards size, but mammals proved that growth comes in many forms, not just larger bodies, but larger minds, larger families, longer childhoods. Mammals began to value learning, to test boundaries, to explore. Some began walking vast distances, some developed complex vocalizations, some formed bonds that lasted entire lifetimes. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about connection, and in those connections, a new kind of life was beginning. A life that didn't just react to the Earth, but remembered it. The world prepares again. The age of mammals was still in its infancy, but the pieces were falling into place. Forests stretched across continents, rivers carved deeper paths, grasses began to spread, and the climate, though unpredictable, settled into something livable. Earth, once again, was ready, ready for migration, ready for vision, ready for wonder. And somewhere, in the canopy of a leafy tree, a small primate blinked at the sunlight through leaves, not with fear, but with curiosity, not for food, but for meaning. Soon, very soon, life would reach for more than safety. It would reach for memory, for thought, for story, and from the forests, another chapter would begin. There are moments in Earth's history when the world doesn't just change, it notices. Tonight, we step into one of those moments, a chapter not of rocks or oceans, not of bones or teeth, but of something softer, something invisible, thought. It didn't arrive like a thunderclap. There was no switch flipped, no mind that suddenly woke. Instead, it crept in, slowly, quietly, like the dawn, first as instinct, then memory, then intention, and eventually, reflection. We follow the thread of consciousness tonight, not as an answer, but as a question. Earth began asking itself through the minds of apes, and eventually, through you. Its eyes are forward-facing, its movements are deliberate, but something else is happening, something deeper. It recognizes another, it remembers a face, it anticipates a reaction. That's not just behavior, that's awareness. These early apes weren't human, but they were close. They lived in families, they mourned their dead, they played, they shared, and in their play, in their grieving, in their curiosity, consciousness stretched a little further. What is consciousness really? It's not an easy question. Is it the ability to think, to feel, to plan, to recognize the self in a reflection? Science doesn't have a single definition, but perhaps you don't need one. You feel it, even now, the part of you that hears this voice, that remembers your day, that dreams as you sleep. That's not your lungs or your skin or your bones. That's something layered on top, a whisper the body carries like breath. Consciousness is not separate from life, it's life turned inward, and somewhere along the path of mammals, Earth gave itself a mirror. Hands that wander. As primates evolved, their hands changed. They became more flexible, more curious, able to grip branches, and eventually tools. And tools changed everything, not just because they made life easier, but because they made thought visible. A rock shaped to crack nuts, a stick used to draw in the dirt, a pattern passed from one generation to another. Not instinct, not accident, but intention. With each tool, memory became external, not just in the brain, but in the world, and slowly the world responded. Memory that lasts. One of the gifts of consciousness is memory that stays. Not just habits, but stories. Early hominins, human ancestors, began to carry memory not only in their minds, but in their behaviors. They watched the sky, tracked animals, followed the seasons, taught their young. Their brains grew, their relationships deepened. They began to think not just about now, but about what comes next. They became time travelers, and with time, they changed. Earth wasn't just filled with life anymore, It was filled with minds, and those minds began to ask questions. From apes to humans, the leap from early apes to the first humans wasn't sudden. It was made of thousands of quiet steps. Some stood taller, walked longer, carried food in their arms, used fire to cook and warm and gather. Fire brought people together. Fire gave them night, and in the darkness, with light dancing on cave walls, something else was born. Language, symbols, art, not survival tools, but meaning. The world was no longer just something to live in, but something to live with. Consciousness was now speaking aloud, the sound of thought. Imagine the first words, not polished, not poetic, but real, grunts, gestures, rhythms in the throat, simple sounds that carried weight, danger, comfort, direction, desire, and from those sounds came structure, grammar, naming. With language, humans didn't just react to the world, they began to shape it. They told stories, shared memories, passed on lessons not just through genes, but through generations. And those lessons changed everything, because what one person discovered, another could remember, and build upon, and question. That's the power of a thinking species. It doesn't just evolve, it intentionally evolves. The birth of self. Consciousness is not only the awareness of others, but the awareness of the self. And at some point the early humans began to look inward. They grieved. They decorated the bodies of their dead. They left offerings. They painted their memories on cave walls. A handprint, a spiral, an animal's form outlined in ochre, not for survival, but for meaning. These were not just creatures, they were selves. And with that, Earth had created something extraordinary, a species that could ask, who am I? What is this place? Why does it feel like something to be me? No longer just alive, but aware of being alive, still evolving. You might think this was the end of the journey, but consciousness isn't a destination. It grows, it deepens, it changes. Your own mind is not the same as it was 10 years ago, and the minds of the future, yours, your children's, your species, will change again. We are still learning what thought can do, still exploring the edges of awareness, dreams, imagination, music, mathematics, compassion. These are not accidents. They are the blossoming of a nervous system millions of years in the making. Earth didn't just create creatures, it created inner lives, and those lives now look at the stars, listen to the wind, wonder where it all came from, and whisper stories into the dark. The moment you learn to speak is the moment the world begins speaking through you. Tonight, we wander into the birth of something not made of bone or stone, but of air, of rhythm, of meaning carried on breath, language. Not just sound, not just noise, but a bridge between minds. The moment Earth began storing knowledge outside of instincts was the moment it began remembering itself, and that changed everything. Because with words, life became story. The world before words, before language, everything had to be learned again, by each body, each generation. You could watch, you could mimic, you could hope, but there was no memory to inherit. A flood would come and be forgotten. A fire would burn, and no one would warn the next. The sky would change, and only the stars would remember. Without language, memory is personal. It ends when the mind that holds it ends. But somewhere, in the soft murmurs of early humans, sounds began to stick, not random, not meaningless, but useful. The shaping of sound. Imagine a small group of humans huddled around a fire. One points, another grunts, and for the first time, that sound becomes shared understanding. Maybe it means food, maybe danger, maybe come here, but it works, and once it works, it grows. A sound for water, a rhythm for shelter, a tone for love, a hiss for warning, each word a thread, each sentence a weave, and soon, humans weren't just surviving, they were communicating. Language didn't explode into the world, it bloomed, and Earth began to listen to itself. Memory without biology. With language, memory left the body. Now, knowledge could leap across minds. It could be shared, stored, taught, questioned. It no longer lived in muscles or instincts, but in culture. A child could be born into a world already explained, not just fed, but told how to hunt, not just warned, but told why the fire must be fed, not just held, but sung to, in lullabies that stretched backward through time. This was the moment memory became collective, and with it came civilization. The first cultures. Cultures aren't made of buildings or borders. They're made of shared meaning, of habits, of songs, of rules, of stories told at dusk and remembered at dawn. The first cultures grew around rivers, in forests, along coastlines. They passed down knowledge in rhythms, chants, dances, oral histories. Who planted first? Where the herds moved? When the rains came? These were not just traditions, they were tools. Language made time stretch longer than a lifetime. It let the dead whisper to the living, and the future begin to listen. Earth had learned how to speak, and it spoke through us. The invention of symbols. At some point, words moved beyond breath. They became visible. Marks on stone, scratches in bone, paint on cave walls, a handprint, a spiral, an animal with arrows through it. Not language as we know it, but a message left behind. Early humans were beginning to write, not in letters yet, but in symbols. And once meaning could be stored in shapes, civilization accelerated. Stories no longer had to be memorized, they could be inscribed, and memory, once fragile, became architecture. The world was now readable. The rise of writing. Writing changed everything. The first scripts, cuneiform in clay, pictographs on tablets, recorded grain, taxes, birth, practical, precise, but soon they recorded gods, kings, battles, prayers, poems, thoughts, made permanent. And with writing, culture became history. We began to see the past not as a fog, but as a path, a timeline of choices, a sequence of echoes, and for the first time, Earth had a memory that lasted. You live in that memory now, in books, in names, in the stories you were told as a child. You are part of Earth's long conversation with itself. The weaving of minds. Language is not just about telling, it's about weaving. Your mind, shaped by your culture shaped by memory, your memory, shaped by stories. We don't just inherit genes, we inherit metaphors. Every idea you carry, that kindness matters, that fire burns, that the stars tell time, was once a story someone had to say, someone had to teach. And now, you carry it forward, even when you're silent, even in sleep. You are a thread in a much older fabric. Why stories matter. We don't tell stories just to pass time. We tell them to make sense, to soften chaos, to understand suffering, to hold beauty longer. Early myths weren't lies. They were maps, pointing to truth, using symbols the heart could feel. A sunrise isn't just light, it's rebirth. A mountain isn't just stone, it's stillness. A river isn't just water, it's time flowing forward. With language we gave shape to the unseen, and in doing so, we began to remember who we were. Earth speaks through you. Every time you speak kindly, every time you teach, every time you remember something worth passing on, you're continuing a process, older than pyramids, older than alphabets, older than fire. You are part of how the earth keeps talking to itself, not with earthquakes, not with weather, but with meaning, with memory, with the quiet power of thought made visible through words. So when you close your eyes tonight, and your mind wanders through dreams, know this, you are not just alive, you are part of a language still being spoken, a story still unfolding, a memory still being made, and tomorrow, Earth will continue remembering, through you. By now, language had spread like wind through branches, whispers turning to songs, songs turning to memory, and memory turning to movement. And that movement began to settle. Tonight, we wander into the stillness that followed the wandering, when humans stopped chasing the horizon and began to shape the ground beneath them. This is the story of how we built homes, planted seeds, raised walls, measured shadows, watched stars, and slowly began to call something ours. This is the breath of civilization, not a sudden rise, but a slow inhaling, a rhythm between land and life. The gift of the seed. It began quietly. Somewhere in a valley, a human scattered seeds into soft soil, and instead of walking away, they waited, and the seeds grew. That moment, so simple, so patient, was the beginning of something enormous. Agriculture. No longer did we need to chase the herds or forage the forests. Now, the earth could feed us in one place. Grains, fruits, legumes, domesticated animals grazing at the edge of our hut. With this, humans began to linger, and in that lingering, villages were born. We had always adapted to nature, but now, nature began adapting to us. Settling down, to farm is to trust the future. It means planning, staying, protecting. Humans began building more than shelters. They built storage, they built walls, they built systems of trade and ritual, and shared labor. A village was more than a cluster of huts. It was a shared dream, and as more people gathered, so did more ideas. Innovation thrives where minds overlap. Pottery, irrigation, weaving, math, music. What was once survival became expression. The rise of the city. As villages grew, something new took shape. Cities, not just homes but roles, not just gathering, but governance, not just surviving, but organizing. In cities you didn't have to know how to do everything. You could specialize. One person grew wheat, another baked bread, another wrote laws. Cities became living systems, with neighborhoods like lungs, marketplaces like hearts, roads like arteries carrying trade and talk. And in their center, often, a temple, or a monument, or a stone calendar aligned to the solstice, because even as we mastered the ground, we kept looking to the sky. Time becomes visible. To plant is to know the seasons. To rule is to track the days. And so early civilizations began watching the sky not for wonder, but for order. The stars became a clock, the moon a calendar, the sun a reminder that all things move in rhythm. Stonehenge, the Mayan temples, the Egyptian sundials, all silent tools to listen to time. But time was no longer just watched, it was obeyed. The moment we began counting hours, we began living by them, and Earth, through us, began measuring itself. The price of structure. Civilization gave us stability, but also complexity. When land is owned, borders are born. When grain is stored, wealth appears. When roles are divided, hierarchy forms. Power concentrated, kings rose, wars began, but so did cooperation, trade, law, philosophy. We began asking bigger questions. What is justice? What is beauty? What is time? And from temples and libraries, scrolls and songs, we wrote ourselves into permanence, not just surviving each day, but defining what those days meant. The sacred rhythm. Ancient people didn't separate time from spirit. A harvest was a holy thing. A flood had a message. A full moon could change fate. Rituals formed around the return of light, the end of rain, the rise of constellations. Civilization didn't erase wonder, it organized it. And even today, in digital clocks and satellite weather, you still follow those ancient rhythms, waking with the sun, resting in the dark, marking birthdays, watching the moon. You are more ancient than you realize, because time lives in you too. The pulse of the earth. Every city, every road, every calendar is an echo of Earth's breath. You plant because soil invites it. You count because stars drift. You dream because fire gave you night. Our deepest structures, governments, rituals, traditions, are not foreign to the earth. They are its extensions. We did not build civilization on top of the planet. We grew it from within. And when you walk through a city at night, lights flickering, voices low, you're not far from that first village, from that first fire, from that first seed. Still a story in motion. Civilization is not fixed. It's evolving. Languages change, borders shift, ideas rise, collapse, rise again. But the rhythm remains. We settle, we speak, we shape, we remember, and always, we keep listening to the earth beneath us. Because every system we create, from agriculture to architecture, is still part of the great conversation, the one that began with a cell and now speaks with cities. You've walked through forests, you've drifted through oceans, you've stood beneath stars. But perhaps the most mysterious landscape you'll ever explore is the one inside you. Tonight we turn inward to a world made of electricity and memory, of thought and feeling, of billions of silent signals shaping every second of your life. The human brain. It is not just a tool, not just an organ, it is Earth thinking about itself. A galaxy of neurons, a whispering network, a place where the universe finds a mirror, the quiet architect. Your brain began forming before you were born, long before your first memory, your first breath, your first word. The architecture was already in motion. It began with simple signals, cells communicating like raindrops tapping on windows. Then came patterns, then rhythms, then complexity. By the time you entered the world, your brain had mapped itself with astonishing detail, ready to listen, ready to learn, ready to remember. It is only 3 pounds, but it holds every sunset you've seen, every name you've spoken, every dream you've chased. Inside your skull, the cosmos folds inward, neurons and stars. There are roughly as many neurons in your brain as there are stars in the Milky Way. Each one connects to thousands of others. They speak in pulses. They form constellations of thought, changing shape with every experience. A single moment, a smell, a sound, a smile, can reshape those connections. You are not made of facts, you are made of networks, and your mind is not fixed. It moves, learns, heals, rewrites. Like a sky that changes with the seasons, your thoughts are constellations drawn by time. The symphony within, your brain is always playing, even when you sleep, even when you dream, even now, as you listen to this voice. Signals fire in harmony, some for memory, some for emotion, some for sensation. There's a rhythm to your mind, like a quiet orchestra beneath every thought. You don't need to conduct it, you are it. And within this symphony, something beautiful happens. You become aware, not just of the world, but of yourself. The birth of a self. Somewhere in the folds of your brain, a mirror is formed. You begin to say I, to recognize your face, to feel not just hunger but hope, not just pain, but meaning. This is the self, not an object, not a place, but a process woven from memory, attention, emotion, and reflection. The brain does not just store knowledge, it shapes identity. You are not just a body with a mind, you are a mind that dreams of itself, and in that dream, you shape the world around you. Imagination, the universe inside. Have you ever thought of something that doesn't exist? A story, a song, a place you've never been? That's imagination, your brain's quiet magic. It doesn't obey gravity, it doesn't need permission. It wanders, it builds, it asks, what if? And sometimes what you imagine becomes real. Tools, language, paintings, love, all imagined before they were lived. Your mind is not just a mirror, it is a painter, and sometimes a poet. Emotion, the mind's weather. Your brain doesn't just think, it feels. Joy, fear, gratitude, longing. These are not weaknesses, they are signals, like weather patterns shaping the day. They guide choices, they deepen memory, they connect us. When you feel sadness, your brain remembers it more vividly. When you feel love, it releases chemicals that soothe and bond. Emotion is not noise, it is the music of meaning. Without feeling, a thought is just a shadow. With it, it becomes a light. Dreams, night's silent theater. Each night your brain creates a theater. You lie still, your body rests, but your mind opens its wings. Dreams are not random, they are stories your brain tells in symbols. To process, to prepare, to imagine. Some are strange, some are beautiful, some vanish by morning, but all of them come from you, from your past, your desires, your fears and hopes. And even when you forget them, they shape you, because every dream leaves a trace, like footprints in morning fog. The brain and the cosmos. It's easy to think of the brain as separate from the stars, but they are made of the same elements. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, stardust folded into thought. When you wonder about the universe, you are part of what the universe is wondering about. When you feel awe, that awe is a signal that something bigger than you still includes you. You are not watching from the outside, you are the inside, looking out. The brain is not apart from the cosmos. It is the cosmos, organized into curiosity. What it means to think. To think is to reach backward, into memory, to reach forward, into possibility, to reach outward, into others, and inward, into yourself. Your brain lets you shape the world and be shaped by it. It lets you forgive, remember, imagine, sleep. It lets you hear a voice like this and feel less alone. And it asks, gently, who am I? Where did I come from? What else is possible? These questions are not problems to solve, they are invitations. The earth wandering through you. Somewhere, in the flickering light of an ancient fire, a hand touches stone. It holds a piece of charcoal, and for the very first time, it draws. Not a tool, not a map, not a number, but a memory, a story, a feeling. Tonight, we step into that quiet moment, when survival was no longer enough, when the brain, so full of thought, asked a deeper question: what does it mean to be alive? And with that question, art was born. The first paintings, deep in the caves of Chiave, Lascaux, Altamira, the walls tell stories older than language: horses running, hands reaching, eyes, bold and full of motion. They were drawn tens of thousands of years ago, yet they still speak, not in words, but in feeling. A child might have watched as pigment met stone. A hunter might have painted a bison in the hope of its return. These images were not decoration. They were memory, they were ritual. Marks not just on the wall, but on the mind. The first galleries were lit by fire. Why we create art is not useful in the way food or shelter is, but it feeds something just as vital: wonder, curiosity, belonging. It lets you show another person what it feels like to be you. A line on a cave wall, a hum in the throat, a symbol carved in bone. Each one says, I was here, I saw this, I felt something. Even now, thousands of years later, you can still feel their presence in brushstrokes, in rhythms, in colors that seem to breathe. Make art is to leave behind a soul print, the voice before language, before words found their structure. There was song, a mother hums to her child, a voice echoes in a canyon, a rhythm rises with the heartbeat of a drum. Music may be older than writing, a language of emotion, born in the space between silence and breath. Even now, music moves you in ways you can't explain. It bypasses thought, it reaches memory, it brings tears without asking why. And somewhere, long ago, early humans felt that too, not just to entertain, but to remember, to feel less alone. When you hum in the dark, you're singing with ancestors. The ritual of sound. Music became part of ritual, not just expression, but connection. Drums before a hunt, chants for rain, flutes echoing through valleys at dusk. These weren't performances, they were prayers, ways to shape emotion, to summon courage, to share grief. To lose yourself in sound is to remember that you're part of something larger. Even today, you can feel that in lullabies, in symphonies, in the simple rhythm of waves against shore. The universe hums, and sometimes, you hum back. The first gods. At some point humans began to sense something even deeper, that life was not just biology, but mystery. The sun gave light, the moon marked time, the river brought food. They weren't just objects, they were beings, not gods in the way we name them now, but forces, presences. And so began belief, not as control, but as relationship. Humans offered thanks, left gifts, danced in circles beneath stars, not to get something, but to feel connected. The birth of spirit. Religion didn't start with commandments, it started with awe, with the gasp of seeing lightning, with the grief of a body returned to earth, with the question, where did they go? Belief is not just about answers, It's about honoring the mystery. And in every culture, from mountaintops to river deltas, humans found ways to speak to what they could not see, not to explain everything, but to find comfort, to feel held, to believe, was to be heard, and perhaps, Earth listened back. Temples of meaning. Over time, rituals became practices, beliefs became traditions, communities built temples, altars, sacred paths, some carved in stone, some woven in words, some passed down as stories told beneath stars. These weren't just rules, they were reminders of cycles, of kindness, of responsibility to something greater. And while names changed, Ra, Gaia, Shiva, Yahweh, the Creator, the unknown, the feeling stayed the same, that life was more than breath, that being alive meant something. And we are still learning what that is. The human mystery. We are the only creatures who cry at music, who paint dreams, who ask the sky for meaning. And maybe that is our gift, to carry both biology and wonder, to be made of atoms, but seek the soul. You are not just alive, you feel your aliveness. You carry memories in more than neurons. You carry them in stories, in art, in longing. You are not just part of nature, you are nature, curious about itself. From symbols to stories, what began as a line on a cave wall became a cathedral, a novel, a lullaby sung over generations. We have always searched for meaning, and we've always created it, in poetry, in myth, in a single flower, placed on a grave. You are part of that lineage, even if you've never painted, even if you've never prayed. The fact that you wonder means you belong to it. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, you carry all of it within you, the spark of music, the shape of language, the longing to connect. And perhaps, in dreams, your mind will paint something new, a thought, a memory, a meaning all your own. Because the story of Earth becoming alive didn't end with life, it continued with awareness, and now, it begins to imagine what's possible. If you hold a stone in your hand and strike it against another, you are no longer just reacting to the world, you are shaping it. Tonight, we wander into the story of tools, and how, across centuries, they stopped being just things we used, and became things that used us. We didn't just invent machines, we wove them into our rhythm, our memory, our very sense of self. And somewhere along the way, the line between hand and hammer, mind and mechanism, began to blur. The first spark. It began with a stone, rough, heavy, silent, but in the right hands, transformed. A tool to crack bones, a spark to start fire, a blade to cut and carve and survive. Early humans didn't invent tools in one moment. They discovered them gradually, an echo of instinct, polished by trial and error. And each time a new tool was made, something else sharpened too. The mind, not just reacting, but remembering, refining, improving. And with every new tool, the earth gained a new voice through us. Tools as memory. A tool is a frozen idea, a solution, solidified. Once made, it can be passed on, taught, copied, improved. That means knowledge no longer had to live only in language or song. It could live in the weight of a hammer, the edge of a blade, the rhythm of wheels. The hand learned from the past, without ever meeting the one who first imagined it. Each tool became a kind of time travel, carrying thoughts across centuries. The wheel still turns, the needle still sews, the chisel still shapes. Ideas made tangible, matter infused with memory, becoming builders. As tools grew, so did our confidence. We shaped shelters from wood and clay. We moved water across dry lands. We crossed rivers, cut stone, built walls, raised roofs. But tools did more than build homes. They built society. They allowed more people to live together, to specialize, to organize. With metal came plows, swords, scaffolding. With fire came pottery, glass, metallurgy. Tools were no longer simple extensions of the hand. They were extensions of ambition. And Earth watched as tiny animals began changing the surface to match the shapes in their minds. Tools and thought. Tools don't just change the world, they change the mind. Holding a hammer shifts how you see wood. Holding a pen shifts how you see time. Holding a map changes how you think about space. Every tool is an invitation to think differently, to solve differently, and in return, the brain adapts, neurons shift, skills deepen, new possibilities unfold. The brain is plastic. It doesn't just use tools, it becomes one with them. You are not separate from your machines. You're shaped by them, just as you shape them in return. The printing press and memory unbound. Then came the press, with movable type and ink. Memory broke free from voices and scribes. Books poured from machines like rivers of thought. Ideas leapt from mind to page, from page to mind, from city to continent. The Renaissance bloomed, science quickened, faith shifted, curiosity found a louder voice, and for the first time in history, a single thought could reach millions, without speech, without borders, without time. The press didn't just multiply knowledge, it democratized it, and the world would never think the same again. Machines of power. The next great leap was the machine not powered by muscle, but by steam. Engines, factories, clocks that ticked with precision, mills that spun with tireless rhythm. This was the birth of industry, the moment when work itself became mechanized, but with it came new tension. What happens when a tool becomes faster than you, more accurate, more tireless? The world began to speed up, noise increased, cities swelled. Time became something you measured, not just something you felt. We were no longer just shaping machines, they were beginning to shape our lives. The invisible machine, electricity. Then came light, wired into walls, sparked into existence. Electricity became the quiet heartbeat of the modern world, invisible, but everywhere, powering homes, hospitals, radios, factories, and with it came something more subtle, but just as transformative: connectivity. Voices sent across wires, music shared across oceans, images transmitted without film. Your tools were no longer just physical, they became network machines, talking to each other, ideas faster than paper, thought stretching toward light. Are we still the tool makers? As machines grew smarter, calculating, sensing, learning, the question shifted: are we still leading them, or are they now shaping us more than we shape them? The clock made us punctual, the car changed how cities grew, the phone altered how we listen, and now algorithms guess your next move, your next song, your next question. Tools once silent, now speak, and we have started listening to machines. But that doesn't mean we've lost ourselves, it means we've extended ourselves in new directions. The mirror of technology. Every tool we build reflects something we value: speed, memory, beauty, connection. When you build a telescope, you're saying, I want to see farther. When you build a piano, you're saying, I want to feel deeper. When you build a computer, you're saying, I want to think faster. Machines are not separate from us. They are projections of our desires, our frustrations, our creativity. They are not replacements for the human mind. They are echoes of it, reflections in steel and code. What tools cannot do, a machine can sort, it can calculate, it can repeat, but it cannot wonder. It cannot fall in love with a painting, or weep at the sound of a violin, or feel the ache of a memory stirred by a smell. You, the dreamer of tools, still carry something machines cannot replicate: consciousness, imagination, soul, and that remains yours. The machines we dream are impressive, but the dreamer is still the miracle. Long before we had cities, or books, or names for the days, we had the sky. It was the first ceiling we ever knew, the first mystery, the first storybook written in moving light. Tonight, we lift our heads, not in search of answers, but in reverence, to listen to what the stars have been whispering since the beginning. Because before we could understand time, we watched it rise and fall with the sun. Before we could measure distance, we followed it across constellations. And before we knew we lived on a planet, we thought we lived under a dome of gods. The sky before science. To ancient people, the sky was not just above them, it was alive. The stars weren't distant fires, they were ancestors, messengers, patterns of destiny. The moon wasn't a rock, it was a goddess, a calendar, a watcher of tides and dreams. The sun wasn't a sphere, It was the giver of life, the eye of a god, the one who returned each morning, unless something had gone terribly wrong. The sky was not empty. It was the most sacred place of all, patterns in the darkness, and yet there was order. If you watched long enough, the stars returned to their same path. The moon changed shape in a steady rhythm. The sun climbed and sank with quiet purpose. Patterns, cycles, clues. So humans began to track them, not just with awe, but with attention. Stones aligned with solstices, monuments carved to mark equinoxes, calendars born from shadow and sunbeam. The heavens weren't random, they were a language, and somewhere between wonder and observation, astronomy was born. The world turns. Have you ever stood still and felt like the sky is moving? That illusion that the stars spin around you comes from a deeper truth. It's not the sky that moves, it's you. The earth spins beneath your feet at over 1,000 kilometers per hour, and you barely feel it. The stars you see tonight are not in the same place they were yesterday, nor will they be tomorrow. And yet, they feel still, like old friends waiting exactly where you left them. The sky teaches patience, and the earth, she turns quietly beneath our questions. When we found out we're not the center, for much of history, humans believed Earth was the center of everything. The sky, they thought, turned around us. The stars danced for us. The planets orbited our story. But then came Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, and suddenly, the idea cracked open. We were not the center. We were moving around a sun, which itself moved around a galaxy, which itself was drifting in a sea of other galaxies. This wasn't just a shift in astronomy. It was a shift in identity, and for many, it was humbling, but for others, it was liberating. The telescope's gift. When Galileo pointed his telescope toward the heavens, the sky lost its smooth perfection. He saw craters on the moon, moons orbiting Jupiter, spots on the sun. The heavens were not divine and flawless. They were real, rough, changing. It was as if the universe leaned closer and said, "I am not above you. I am part of you." And ever since, telescopes have only deepened that invitation. From mountaintops, from satellites, from the dark stillness of space itself, each lens revealing something older, farther, and more beautiful than we imagined. The language of light. Stars do not speak, not in sound, but they sing in light. A spectrum, a fingerprint, a message from millions of years ago. When we look at stars, we are seeing their past. Some light takes hundreds of years to reach you, some takes billions. So when you gaze at the night sky, you're not just looking outward, you're looking backward. The universe is not a place, it is a time machine, and you are inside it. Each star, a memory written in photons, Earth in context. As our knowledge grew, so did our sense of scale. Earth, once the center of everything, became a pale blue dot, not meaningless, but precious, because the more we saw, the more we realized how rare we are. A planet not too hot, not too cold, with liquid water, stable seasons, and a moon that steadies its spin. In the vast cosmic lottery, Earth is a miracle, not by luck alone, but by a series of impossibly delicate chances. A home that looks small feels big. The farther we gaze, the more we understand. Home is not just a place we live, it's a place we notice. It's where meaning emerges, where memory is made, where life becomes aware of itself. The Earth may look small from space, but within it, art, love, grief, history, laughter, wonder. Galaxies may be grand, but Earth is where your story began, and still unfolds. You are not lost in the cosmos, you belong to it, just as it belongs to you. You cannot see it, you cannot hold it, but with every breath you take, you share something ancient. A molecule that passed through forests, that circled mountains, that once filled the lungs of creatures now long gone. Tonight, we drift into the atmosphere, the unseen shell that made life not only possible but endlessly renewing. It is not just air, it is memory in motion, it is breath, shared across species, across centuries, across lives you've never known. And perhaps, It is the most generous thing the earth has ever made. The sky beneath our feet. When you think of the sky, you might look up, but in truth, you are always inside it. The atmosphere doesn't begin where clouds float. It begins at your skin. It wraps the planet in a soft, invisible shell, held close by gravity, moved by sunlight, stirred by heat and rotation. And though it reaches hundreds of kilometers high, most of what you breathe lives in just the first few. The troposphere, where weather is born, where birds soar, where breath travels. We are not under the sky, we are swimming in it. A shield made of air. You might not think of air as armor, but that's what it is. Every second, Earth is bombarded by radiation, by meteors, by particles that could strip it bare. But the atmosphere catches them, burns them, bends them, blocks them. It lets in just enough light to warm, but not enough to scorch. It filters ultraviolet. It slows falling rocks to dust, and it holds in warmth, a gentle greenhouse that keeps nights from freezing into silence. Without this invisible layer, Earth would be quiet and lifeless. The breath before breathing, but it wasn't always this way. The earliest atmosphere, if we could call it that, was toxic. Hydrogen, methane, ammonia, no oxygen, no ozone, no breath for lungs not yet imagined. Volcanoes shaped it, comets added to it. The planet churned and fumed in a storm of gases. And yet, in those hostile vapors, the chemistry of life was already dancing. Simple molecules learning to copy themselves, to build, to reach. And somewhere along the line, something extraordinary happened. The algae that changed everything, tiny green unnoticed, cyanobacteria. They lived in shallow waters, fed on sunlight, released something new, oxygen. At first it was poison to most early life, but over time, it transformed the sky. The great oxygenation event, not an explosion, but a slow bloom. Centuries unfolding like petals. Oxygen built up, ozone formed, the sky turned blue, and suddenly, for the first time on Earth, lungs became possible. A planet once cloaked in suffocating gases had made itself breathable. The dance of gases. The air you breathe is a blend, tuned with quiet precision, mostly nitrogen, calm, steady, some oxygen, vital, reactive, a whisper of argon, a hush of carbon dioxide, each one with its own role. Too much oxygen, and fires would never stop. Too little, and life would falter. The atmosphere is not static. It responds. It breathes with the forests. It sighs with the oceans. It pulses with the seasons. Leaves bloom. Oxygen rises. Leaves fall. Carbon returns. Every year, the planet takes a breath, and so do you, carried by wind. Have you ever closed your eyes and felt the wind touch your face? That movement isn't random. It's the language of temperature, of geography, of rotation. Warm air rises at the equator. Cold air sinks at the poles. The planet spins and the wind is pulled into spirals. This gives us weather, storms, breezes, patterns that feed crops and carry seeds. But it also gives us something subtler, connection. A particle exhaled in Africa may someday settle in Asia. A sigh released here can cross the world. In the sky we are never fully alone. The sky is alive. The atmosphere is not just passive. It responds. It holds moisture. It reflects heat. It carries pollen, ash, bacteria, even life itself. Sometimes it roars with thunder. Sometimes it whispers in mist. It is both gentle and wild, a scientist and a storyteller. It brings rains that feed nations. It holds storms that remind us of our fragility. And always it surrounds us with invisible rhythm, a quiet pulse, from the ground to the stars. Our breath within it. With every inhale, you draw in air once exhaled by trees, by whales, by ancestors. You breathe molecules once inside Cleopatra, or Galileo, or a bird above the Andes. Breath is recycled, borrowed, returned. What was in your lungs moments ago now drifts through your room, your town, the sky. You are not a closed system. You are part of the exchange. Breath in, the planet offers. Breath out, You give something back, the thinness of it all. It's easy to forget how fragile the sky is. For all its power, its storms and clouds and vastness, it's thin. If Earth were a basketball, its atmosphere would be a sheet of plastic wrap. All life depends on that layer, that whisper-thin film of air. And as it changes with pollution, with warming, with imbalance, so too do we. The sky is not just weather, it is warning, it is mirror. It reflects not just sunlight, but how we choose to live, still breathing together. Yet even now, even with all our machines and cities and fire, the atmosphere still holds us. It still brings spring, it still lifts birds, it still cools the skin on warm days, and carries lullabies into open windows. It still catches your breath, and carries it far, perhaps farther than you'll ever go. And maybe that's what it means to be alive on Earth. To borrow breath, to pass it on, to live gently, inside a miracle. Imagine holding a book, a very old one, worn, delicate, written in a language no one taught you, and yet your body understands it. Tonight, we open that book, not with fingers, but with awareness, because inside you, in every cell, every strand of hair, every flicker of breath, there is a story being told. A story 4 billion years in the making, and its author is DNA. Not a thing we built, not a machine we invented, but a message life has been whispering to itself since the beginning, the alphabet of life. DNA is not alive, and yet it holds the instructions for everything that is, every color of every petal, every beat of every heart, every twist of every spiral shell, all of it begins with just 4 letters, A, T, C, G, adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine, simple chemicals, but arranged in nearly infinite patterns, like an alphabet, but one that writes bodies, one that folds into wings or fins or fur, and when it speaks, it does not use sound, it uses form, the first code, long ago before lungs, before eyes, before bones, there were simple molecules, learning to copy themselves. One of them, fragile, coiled, persistent, began to do something different. It didn't just float, it stored instructions, and with each replication, those instructions grew more stable, more complex, more enduring. That was the beginning of DNA, not a moment, but a process. The universe, folding chemistry into memory. The first memory on Earth wasn't a thought, it was a molecule. Molecules that remember. DNA does not think, but it remembers. It remembers how to build a lung, how to shape an eye, how to arrange the bones of a hand so it can one day hold a pen. It passes those instructions down, from parent to child, from root to flower, from egg to bird, and it does so without speaking, without knowing. It simply endures. Every living thing, from bacteria to whales, reads from this silent script, and every one of us is a different verse in the same long poem. The cell's quiet library. Each of your cells contains this code, not just a piece of it, the entire instruction set, locked within a double helix curled tighter than thread on a spool, unseen, unfelt, but always working. Some cells read only certain chapters. A skin cell reads one set, a liver cell reads another, but they all carry the full book, like librarians who each know how to use one room, but walk around with the entire archive inside them. Your body is not just built from cells, it is built from memory, from instruction, from inherited survival. Why it copies. DNA copies itself not to stay the same, but to adapt. Every generation brings tiny changes, mutations. Most do nothing, some cause harm, but a few open new doors, wider wings, sharper eyes, more resilient cells. These are the seeds of evolution, not designed, not decided, but discovered, through trial, through time, through persistence. Evolution is not about perfection, it's about resilience. It's how life listens and answers back. The universal thread. All living things share this thread. The mushroom, the dolphin, the oak, the ant, you. The letters may vary, the sequences may change, but the language it shared. You have DNA in common with trees, with birds, with worms, and not just a little, a lot. Life did not start in separate places. It started once, and branched, and branched, and kept branching until it touched every corner of this earth. That's not just biology, that's family. DNA as time machine. When scientists read ancient DNA, they are not just studying remains. They are listening to echoes, to whispers from mammoths, from Neanderthals, from seeds buried for thousands of years. Each sample holds a time capsule, a moment frozen in molecular form, and inside it, not just what that creature looked like, but how it lived, how it changed, how it connects to you. DNA is not locked in the past, it is a bridge to it, and every time you look in a mirror, you're seeing its most recent draft, the thread of you. Inside your DNA are stories you'll never read, but they're there, how your ancestors adapted to cold, to drought, to strange new lands, why your hair curls, why your blood carries oxygen the way it does. These aren't random, they're chapters in a story of survival, of choices made without knowing, of strength, passed on in silence. You are not just one generation, you are thousands, a walking, breathing record of what life has learned. You are a body, but you're also a biography, more than code. And yet, you are not only your code. DNA gives you structure, but experience gives you meaning. You inherit possibility, not destiny. Identical twins share the same DNA, but their paths, their memories, their thoughts, those are shaped by life, by touch, by voice, by what is loved and what is lost. So yes, DNA is powerful, but it's not the whole story. You are not just a pattern, you are a presence, and presence cannot be sequenced. The living word. Think of DNA as language, not just letters, but a living word, a word passed down like fire, changing slowly, staying alive through its use. Life did not stop when DNA appeared, it expanded, it remembered, and now, as we begin to read it, edit it, understand it, we must also ask, will we be careful, will we be kind, because we are now not just readers, we are writers, and the code we change today echoes forward for lifetimes. We did not invent this story, but now, we help write it. Before anything could see, everything was only felt. Vibration, taste, touch, heat. But then, something shifted. A patch of skin became sensitive to light, then more sensitive, then curved, focused, sharpened. And suddenly, the world could be seen. Tonight, we drift into that quiet transformation, when life looked up and for the first time, opened its eyes. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to notice the light. And once you see the world, you begin to chase it. Before vision, in the earliest oceans, life was blind. It navigated by chemical gradients. It felt pressure. It followed warmth. But light had always been there, streaming from the sun, piercing the surface, dancing in current. To sense it was to gain a new dimension. Because light is not just energy, it's information. It tells you where to go, what to avoid, what's changing. To feel the presence of light is to sense the shape of time. And when life first tuned into that signal, evolution found a new direction. The first eyes, they weren't eyes as you know them. No pupils, no irises, no color, just clusters of cells, patches that darkened when light was near. But even that small awareness was powerful. It let simple creatures know, up from down, day from night, safe from dangerous. These early eyes helped find warmth, hide from predators, or seek food before it disappeared. And so, those who could sense light, lived longer, fed better, passed on more of their code. The world didn't change, but how life experienced it did. From patches to lenses, over millions of years, light-sensing spots deepened. They curved inward, like tiny bowls. This allowed more direction, more shape, more contrast. Eventually a layer formed over them, a lens. With lenses, creatures could now focus, not just detect light, but see images. Imagine that moment, the first eye to glimpse a shadow, the first to catch motion, to see a ripple, and know, that's food, that's danger, that's another like me. The ocean, once a soup of blind instincts, now shimmered with perspective. Life became not just responsive, but aware, the arms race of sight. Vision changed everything, and nature responded. If one creature could see, another had to move faster, hide better, camouflage more cleverly. Eyes begot sharper claws, faster fins, brighter colors. The predator had to see better, the prey had to vanish quicker, and so began one of evolution's great spirals. An arms race of perception. Octopuses developed intelligent sight. Insects split light into complex patterns. Eagles learned to track a heartbeat from far above. All because one day, long ago, a cell turned toward the sun. From one spark of sight came a flood of change. Eyes and the brain. Seeing is not just about eyes. It's about processing what they send. That's where the brain comes in. Vision demands interpretation. Light enters as chaos, but the brain finds shape, depth, motion. It knows a shadow from a predator, a ripple from a rock, a smile from a threat. And as vision sharpened, so did memory, so did strategy, so did learning. Seeing the world made it more predictable, and a predictable world could be navigated. With vision, life didn't just live in the present, it could anticipate. Seeing in color. Color is not out there, it's a sensation created in your mind. Wavelengths of light bounce from objects. Your eye catches them, your brain labels them. Blue, green, crimson, amber. But those colors are not properties, they're perceptions. Some animals see fewer, some, like mantis shrimp, see many more. But why see color at all? To find ripe fruit, to pick out mates, to navigate coral reefs, or signal warnings through bright display. Color vision wasn't just useful, it became expressive, and slowly, it found its way into art, into decoration, into beauty, just for beauty's sake. Eyes that inspire. Look into a human eye. What do you see? Iris like a galaxy, pupil like a doorway, lashes like dark branches in snow. Eyes are not just sensors, they are signals. They express emotion, they mirror thoughts, they reflect the world, and something more. A glance can comfort, a stare can challenge, a wink can say what words never could. And behind each gaze is a mind watching you back. We don't just see, we feel seen. Blindness and insight. Not all life needs sight. Some thrive in caves, some in the deep sea, some lost their eyes when light was no longer useful. And yet, these creatures adapted in other ways. Stronger smell, better hearing, heightened vibration sense. Because life does not cling to one tool, it reshapes, it reimagines. Even in humans, when sight is lost, the brain rewires, touch sharpens, sound paints shape. Vision is powerful, but perception, that runs deeper. You do not need to see the world to feel its shape. Light as story. Have you ever watched the sky change color as the sun sets? That's vision too, but also poetry. Light doesn't just reveal, it moves you. A child watching stars, a painter studying leaves, a lover remembering a gaze. Eyes connect the outer world to the inner one. They are not just windows, they are bridges, and every moment you see, you carry it forward into memory, into story, into meaning. Still evolving. Eyes are not finished. Even now, species are adapting, changing how they see, shifting toward night, or underwater, or ultraviolet. And as humans build new tools, telescopes, microscopes, cameras, we stretch vision even further. We see galaxies, we see atoms, we see inside the body, and the shape of thought. You have built machines to see what your ancestors could not even imagine. But still, the most powerful lens remains your own. Eyes, gentle and complex, still turn toward the light, because to see is to wonder. There is something mesmerizing about fire. A soft flicker, a slow dance, warmth curling through cold night air. Tonight we sit beside that ancient light, not just to stay warm, but to remember, because fire did more than change our surroundings. It changed us. It is both destruction and creation, both danger and comfort, both wild and deeply human. And when we learned to tend it, not just fear it, something inside us, began to glow too. The moment we mastered fire was the moment time itself began to slow down. Before fire, after fire. Imagine a world before flame. Nights were dark, cold came quickly, food was eaten raw, if at all, and predators were not far. We lived as animals did, limited by sun, by season, by circumstance. But then, something changed. Maybe lightning struck a tree, maybe lava spilled across a plain, maybe dry grass caught the sun just right. And someone, a curious ancestor, watched the flame, not with fear, but fascination, and dared to get close. The first spark. We didn't invent fire, it was always there, in volcanoes, in the sky, in the Earth's own crust. But learning to keep it, to protect it, carry it, feed it, was something new. That took patience, that took observation, that took time, and once we could do that, everything else began to change. We could cook, we could stay warm, we could stay awake past sunset. Fire became more than survival, it became ritual, a place to gather, to speak, to remember. A hearth became a home, flame, and the brain. Cooking changed our bodies, it made food easier to digest. Calories came faster, brains grew larger, and with more energy came more curiosity. We could plan, reflect, imagine. We didn't have to spend every hour searching for food. We could tell stories instead, teach, dream. Around the fire, language deepened, culture began, memory passed from one voice to the next. The flame fed the body, but it also fed the mind. Fire gave us time, and time gave us thought. Fire as tool, fire softened hard things, melted ore, hardened clay, baked bread. It helped build weapons, shape tools, clear forests. It became part of everything we made, from bronze to steel to glass, and later, even steam. Yes, even the machines that powered the Industrial Revolution were echoes of that first flame, trapped in metal. Fire was no longer wild, it was harnessed, and wherever smoke rose, civilization soon followed. The spiritual flame. But fire was never just practical, it was mystical. Many cultures saw it as sacred, the breath of gods, the soul made visible. It danced, it consumed, it transformed, ashes to sky, wood to heat, shadow to story. Even today, candles mark our losses, torches lead the way, campfires hold our most honest words. To stare into flame is to glimpse something both ancient and immediate, something alive, but not quite living. The clock fire built, with fire, time changed shape. Before the day ended at dusk, after fire, the night had a second chapter. We could wait, rest, think. We could divide time, not just into light and dark, but into moments, meals, ceremonies, watch shifts. Fire was our first clock, not ticking, but glowing, and every flicker meant another second of life. We didn't just survive the night, we inhabited it. When fire went inside, eventually flame entered our homes. Hearths, lamps, furnaces. It brought light indoors, warmth closer, comfort, consistent. But it also brought danger. Fire was wild, and always wanted to stay that way. A spark could build a town, but it could also burn it down. So we built chimneys, and stoves, and rules. Fire became domesticated, but only just. The engine of change. Centuries later, we turned fire into steam, boilers, pistons, pressure, and with it, trains, ships, factories. A world that once moved at the speed of walking, now raced on rails. But inside every machine was the same idea: burn fuel, make heat, turn motion. From caves to combustion engines, fire had taken us far. The modern flame. Today many fires are hidden, behind wires, inside turbines, beneath touch screens. We still burn gas, coal, wood, to keep our world alive, but we no longer gather around flame. We've forgotten how to listen to it. It no longer crackles in our ears. It no longer casts stories on walls, and maybe, just maybe, we miss it. Because the flame did more than warm us. It connected us. It turned strangers into community. The last ember, fire gave us stories, gave us shelter, gave us time. It shaped our tools, our cities, our clocks, but it also shaped something quieter, our patience, our memory, our ability to sit in stillness and simply watch a dance of light. So tonight, if you close your eyes and imagine a flame, let it remind you of who you are and how far a little warmth can go. Imagine holding a stone, cool, smooth, ordinary, but inside it, a rib, a tooth, a whisper of something that once breathed. Fossils are not just remnants, they are messages. Time, captured, not in photographs, but in form. Tonight, we listen to those ancient voices, locked in shale, curled in amber, crushed beneath mountains that once were seas. They do not shout, they do not explain, but if you listen softly, they tell you, we were here, and you are not the first to wonder where it all began. The earth keeps secrets. Beneath the soil you walk on is a story billions of years long, layer upon layer, pressed down by wind, water and waiting. Some layers hold nothing, just dust, just time, but others hold shape, traces of shells, imprints of leaves, echoes of skeletons. These are fossils, not just bones, but evidence that something once lived here, moved here, died here, and stayed. How bones become stone. It begins slowly. A creature dies, sinks into mud, gets buried, gently, deeply by time. Over years, its soft parts vanish, but its hard parts, they remain. And then something astonishing begins. Minerals seep in, bone becomes rock, calcium replaced by silica, iron or calcite. The shape stays, the substance changes. A fossil is not the thing itself, it is a record of the thing, not alive, but not forgotten either. It is Earth's way of remembering what it once held close, imprints of the ordinary. Not all fossils are grand, some are simple, a fern pressed into stone, a ripple of skin, a trail of footprints left behind. These are called trace fossils. They don't show the body, they show the life. Where something walked, where it slept, where it scratched at the sand. It's like reading a journal, written without words, moments captured by chance, moments that once mattered to no one, except the creature who lived them. The bone bed beneath us. There are places on Earth where fossils cluster like secrets spilled. The Burgess Shale, the Gobi Desert, the Badlands of Montana, the limestone of China. These places are time capsules, not just of one species, but of entire ecosystems. Corals beside trilobites, dinosaurs beneath ash, mammoths under tundra. In these places, layers speak, and if you peel them gently, they tell of worlds so different, so vibrant, they almost feel imaginary, but they weren't. They were real when we first found them. For much of history, fossils puzzled us. Some thought they were tricks, some called them dragon bones, some believed they were shaped by gods. It wasn't until the 1600s and beyond that science began to listen differently, to wonder, what if these were not symbols but skeletons? What if these bones belonged to creatures no longer alive? And if so, where did they go? Fossils didn't just tell us about the past, they introduced the idea of extinction, that life can end. The clock in the stone. Fossils also gave us time, not hours or minutes, but epochs. The Cambrian, the Devonian, the Jurassic, the Cretaceous. Each layer of rock holds clues. Which animals were there? Which ones disappeared? We began to read the Earth like a layered book, not all at once, but one fossil at a time. And in doing so, we realized something humbling. The Earth is much older than we thought, and humans are very, very recent guests. The lost giants. Some fossils stopped us cold. Massive bones, skulls with teeth longer than your hand, creatures unlike anything alive today. The dinosaurs, the terror birds, the saber-toothed cats. They ruled their time, and then vanished. Their bones remind us that dominance is not permanent, that even the fiercest life can end in silence. And yet, something always comes after, always something new, rising from the dust. Amber and ice, Not all fossils are stone. Some are trapped in tree resin, amber, perfectly preserved, insects mid-flight, feathers in full color, even tiny air bubbles from a world long gone. Others are frozen in ice, mammoths with skin and fur, still holding the last meal in their mouth. These are not just relics, they are mirrors, reminders of how fragile time can be, and how close the past really is. Sometimes, it only takes a thaw to bring yesterday back. Fossils still speak. Today, paleontologists use more than shovels. They use lasers, CT scans, DNA fragments, chemical clues from isotopes. They don't just ask what something was, they ask how it lived, how fast it grew, what it ate, if it raised young, if it could feel pain, if it loved the sun. We're learning to read bones not just as structures, but as biographies, and every fossil is a character in the story of Earth. You are part of this lineage. You may never hold a fossil, but one lives inside you. Your bones, your spine, your breath. You carry the shape of all that came before. You are not an interruption in life's long story. You are its continuation, its latest expression, its current experiment. You too will leave traces, in laughter, in action, in memory, perhaps not fossilized, but still felt, still passed on. Time forgets nothing, it only waits for someone to listen. You may think the ground beneath you is still, solid, permanent, safe. But it's not. The earth beneath your feet is drifting, slowly, steadily, silently. Tonight, we follow those hidden currents, the great, slow dance of tectonic plates, the engine beneath our continents, the sculptor of our mountains, the keeper of volcanic fire. This is not a planet frozen in place. It is alive with motion, underneath the silence. And the world you know today is only one frame in a film still unfolding, a shell that's cracked. Earth's outer layer is not a single piece. It is broken, cracked, into vast slabs of stone called plates. Like puzzle pieces, they slide past each other, crash into each other, pull away from each other. There are about a dozen major ones: the Pacific, the North American, the African, the Eurasian. But they're not just floating, they're riding on something deeper. The mantle, hot, thick, moving rock. Imagine soft caramel beneath a crust, or lava beneath glass. That slow churning heat pushes the plates above. The pace of continents. The plates move slowly, centimeters per year, about as fast as your fingernails grow. But over millions of years, that's enough to shape worlds. Oceans open, continents collide, mountains rise, land sinks, and just as gently as a breath, Earth reshapes itself. Nothing on this planet has stayed where it began. Even now, Australia is drifting north. India is pushing into Asia. Africa is splitting apart at its center. Your hometown is on a journey. You just can't feel it yet. Collide, pull, slide. There are three main ways plates interact. They collide, creating mountains like the Himalayas. They pull apart, creating rifts like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. They slide past each other, like the San Andreas Fault in California. Each motion brings change, each collision brings pressure, and sometimes that pressure is released suddenly, as an earthquake. The ground shakes, reminds us that the planet is not passive, it is still writing, and every crack is part of the story. The birth of mountains. Mountains are not just tall, they are young. Even the oldest peaks were once flat. Only movement lifted them skyward. When plates crash, they don't always break. Sometimes they crumple. Rock folds, rises, reaches into the sky, and then wind and rain begin their work, wearing it down, carving valleys, feeding rivers. But deep beneath the peaks, the plates still push. Mountains breathe too, just very, very slowly. Volcanoes, Earth's fireplaces. Where plates pull apart or collide, you may find volcanoes, places where magma, molten rock, rises to the surface. Eruptions may seem violent, but they are also creative. They form islands, enrich soil, build new land from nothing. Hawaii was born this way. So were parts of Iceland. So was every patch of earth that once glowed with fresh rock. Volcanoes remind us that creation and destruction can be the same thing. Out of fire comes form, the shape of oceans. The oceans too are built by movement. In the Atlantic, new crust forms each day at the mid-ocean ridge. Molten rock rises, solidifies, pushes outward. The seafloor spreads. Continents drift apart. Once, South America and Africa fit together. So did India and Antarctica. So did all land in a single supercontinent called Pangaea. But time stretched it open, and now we sail oceans that didn't exist before. The sea you watch today was once dry land, and one day, maybe again. Tectonics and life. Movement doesn't just change shape, it changes life. When continents drift, climates shift, rainforests dry, deserts bloom, species adapt or vanish. Isolated land gives birth to unique creatures, like marsupials in Australia, lemurs in Madagascar, flightless birds in New Zealand. Plate tectonics is not just a geologic force, it's an evolutionary one. Where land moves, life follows, changes, tries again. The shape of Earth's crust helped shape every living story upon it, including yours. The whisper of quakes. Most of the time, the plates move silently, but when they stick, pressure builds, and when they suddenly release, the ground shudders. Earthquakes are reminders that our planet's calm is temporary, but they are also data. Each tremor helps us understand the deep patterns of stress and shift. They tell us where plates are restless, where energy waits beneath, and one day, they may help us predict what Earth is planning next. How we know? We can't see the mantle, we can't hold a plate in our hands, but we have clues. Seismic waves, GPS drift, magnetic flips frozen in rocks, ocean floor maps, volcanic activity. All these things let us piece together a picture of motion, a motion too slow for one lifetime, but perfectly visible across many. The Earth writes slowly, but it leaves no chapter blank. Even now, new ones are being carved beneath your feet. The living crust. So often, we see Earth as a backdrop, as a stage, but it's not static. It participates. Its crust folds, cracks, lifts. Its mantle breathes. Its plates drift. You stand not on solid ground, but on a raft of stone, floating over fire. And still, you're safe, carried, cradled. The Earth moves gently enough that you can sleep, but never so gently that it forgets to grow. Close your eyes. Imagine a forest, not just the trees, but the spaces between them, the rustle of leaves, the soil beneath roots, the calls of birds, the invisible hum of insects. Now imagine that none of it is random. Everything from the highest branch to the deepest burrow is connected. You're not looking at a collection of creatures, you're listening to a symphony, and life, in its quiet intelligence, has learned to compose. What is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is not a place, it's a relationship between air and leaf, between predator and prey, between fungus and stone. It's the way rivers carry not just water, but nutrients, the way bees carry not just pollen, but promise. Every element, living or not, plays a role. Even you, even now. From the bacteria in your gut to the oxygen you just breathed, you are part of this choreography, a partner in life's unfolding dance. The web of life. Have you ever heard of the food web? Not a chain, a web. Because in nature, nothing is linear. Grass feeds the rabbit feeds the fox dies and feeds the soil feeds the grass. Round and round, energy cycling, life borrowing from death, then returning it gently. It's not about dominance, it's about balance. One thread pulled can tremble the whole web. That's why ecosystems are not just environments, they are equilibriums. The forest's hidden chatter. Beneath a forest, there is a secret network. Fungi, stretching in threads called mycelium. These filaments connect tree to tree, even different species. They send nutrients, share warning signals, pass chemical messages. Some call it the wood wide web. It's not just poetic, it's real. Trees talk, through roots, through chemistry, through trust, built by generations of proximity. It is not just competition, it is cooperation. The forest doesn't grow alone, it grows together. They're rivers, as arteries. Rivers are not just water, they're transport. They carry sediment, minerals, tiny seeds, and invisible bacteria. They shape land, they nourish plains. They invite migration, from fish that swim upstream to spawn to birds that follow river valleys, to insects whose entire lives last a single ripple. Rivers are highways of life, and where they flow, ecosystems follow. Cut off a river, and the entire landscape changes. Rivers remind us that life needs connection. Deserts and rainforests. You might think a desert is empty, but it too is an ecosystem. Sparse, yes, but full of rhythm. Reptiles wait for shade, cacti store water, owls emerge only at night. The scarcity teaches balance, and in balance, life endures. Meanwhile, in rainforests, life is abundant, but fragile. So many species, so many layers, each one interlinked. Lose one bee, and a flower might vanish. Lose one tree, and a bird might fall silent. Abundance doesn't mean safety, it means complexity, and complexity is delicate. Oceans in harmony, beneath the waves, another symphony plays. Phytoplankton float near the surface, converting sunlight into life. Tiny fish feed on them, larger fish feed on those. Sharks, whales, seals, squid, and yet, it's not just size that matters. Coral reefs, though small, are teeming cities, cleaning stations, nurseries, feeding grounds. Each fish, each eel, each sponge, has its niche. Take one away, and the reef begins to unravel. Even silence has a role, even stillness serves the whole. The role of decomposers. Some of life's most important players are not beautiful, not fast, not loud. They are the decomposers. Fungi, bacteria, insects. They break down what dies, they return it to the soil, they recycle what we forget. Without them, ecosystems collapse, because nothing can grow in a world where nothing ends. They are nature's caretakers, the quiet janitors of every forest, field and stream. We rarely notice them, but we owe them everything. Migration and timing. Some animals move, not by chance, but by rhythm. Geese follow the seasons, whales follow the krill, butterflies cross continents. They're not lost, they're attuned, and what guides them? The tilt of the earth, the scent of the wind, the length of daylight. Even tiny changes can disrupt their dance. One early spring, and the flowers bloom too soon. The bees arrive too late, the chain stutters. Ecosystems rely on timing, and timing relies on climate. Human touch, we are part of this too. Our cities, our roads, our farms, they shape ecosystems, sometimes gently, sometimes harshly. We have introduced new species, changed rivers, cleared forests, and yet, we can also restore, rewilding landscapes, protecting pollinators, letting rivers breathe again. Nature is resilient, but not invincible. She listens, but she also remembers, and every choice we make joins the song. The song continues. Ecosystems are not frozen in time, they adapt, they shift, they try new combinations. A wolf reintroduced reshapes rivers, a tree planted invites birds back. One bee can start a field again. The world doesn't need us to fix it, it needs us to listen, to hear the tempo, to honor the harmony, to know when to play softly, and when to simply let it play on. Because life, when left to sing, can heal itself. Somewhere along the way, something changed. A creature, once driven only by hunger, by shelter, by survival, paused and wondered. Looked at the stars, not just with eyes, but with questions. Looked at the forest, not just for food but for meaning. Life had always sensed, but now, life began to reflect. And in that reflection, Earth became conscious of itself. The mirror wakes. No single moment marks the beginning, no date on a calendar, no line drawn in the sand. But slowly, awareness thickened. A brain grew folds, a hand held tools, a mind drew on cave walls, and called it memory. And from that memory came wonder. What am I? Where did I come from? What does it all mean? The earth had grown forests before, oceans, mountains, but now it had grown a mirror, and through us, it could finally see its own face, language, and the inner world. With words, we did something no species had done. We told each other what we felt, not just danger, but longing, not just food, but dreams. Language shaped thought, thought shaped art, art shaped memory, and slowly, the inner world became as real as the outer one. We built temples, painted the sky with gods, named the stars after the things we feared and the things we hoped for. The universe had given us breath. Now we gave it voice. Looking up and inward, we asked questions no bird or beast had asked. What is time? What is death? Why do we love? Why do we know that we love? We charted constellations, mapped seasons, told stories of beginnings and endings. We built calendars, wrote poems, invented gods, and gravity, and grief. We reached for knowledge, as if it were fire, and we lit the darkness, not with flame, but with thought. The earth had made thinkers, and the thinkers made meaning. The rise of reason, then came science, a method, a process, a ritual of careful doubt, and deeper understanding. We asked, what is this? Why does it move? How can I know? We studied the stars, split the atom, watched cells divide, heard echoes from the Big Bang, and as we learned more, the mystery didn't fade, it deepened. The more we saw, the more we realized how much lay unseen. Even now, science does not end questions, it invites them. Earth's memory, our eyes, through us, the planet has watched its own sky, sat on mountain tops, feeling the wind it once formed, walked through rainforests, it helped grow, listened to whales, it shaped in the deep. And now, we send robots to Mars, listen for signals from stars, and wonder if others are out there, reflecting too. The universe became aware of itself, through us, and maybe, just maybe, that was always the plan. Not design, not destiny, just the long, slow unfolding of potential, the fragile gift. But reflection comes with weight. We can create and destroy, we can love and forget, we can build cities and silence forests. The earth gave us thought, and thought gave us power, and now, we face the question only reflection can ask. What will we do with it? Not separate but part of. Sometimes we forget. We are not above the earth. We are of it. Our bones hold its calcium. Our breath holds its air. Our tears come from its oceans. We are not visitors. We are extensions. The universe is not out there. It is in here. The forest breathes, and we breathe with it. The tide shifts, and so do we. The planet listens, through us. The echo that lasts. When you look at a mountain, know this, it's older than language, and still, you understood it. When you stare at the stars, remember, the light you see is from before you were born, but it still reaches you, still waits for you, just like all knowledge, just like all wonder. Reflection is not the end, it is the beginning of belonging. You are not here to conquer Earth, you are here to complete it, to give it a voice, a story, a soul. Closing the circle, we began this journey with silence, a barren world, molten, lonely, still, but slowly, it grew language, it grew forests, it grew fire, it grew thought, it grew you. And now, you lie here, breathing gently, listening calmly, and wondering, which means, the earth has not just become alive, it has become aware. Take your time now. Breathe gently, let your mind drift across everything we've uncovered, because in your stillness, the planet listens, and in your thoughts, it remembers. This is the quiet miracle of being alive on a thinking world. Good night, fellow reflection. Sleep well, and let the earth dream through you.